Love bombing trap. Before you understand what is happening to you, you are already inside it. The person who will eventually cause you the most pain begins by giving you the most pleasure you have ever felt in a relationship. They call at unexpected hours just to say they were thinking of you. They send long messages that read like love letters after knowing you for 3 days. They look at you across a table like you are the only person in any room they have ever entered. They remember the small things you mentioned once in passing and bring them back to you as gifts. They cancel plans with others to be with you. They say things like, "I have never felt this way before, and I knew the moment I saw you, and I can already picture our future together." And you believe them, because why wouldn't you? Nobody performs this level of affection unless it is genuine. That is exactly what they are counting on. Love bombing is not spontaneous. It is a calculated strategy used by manipulators, narcissists, and emotionally predatory individuals to rapidly engineer attachment before you have had time to evaluate who they actually are. They understand that human beings bond through repeated positive emotional experience, and they compress what would normally take months or years into days or weeks. By the time the mask slips and the real behavior emerges, the attachment is already formed. The bond is there. You are now measuring every bad moment against all those early perfect ones. You keep trying to get back to the beginning, and they know that. They designed the beginning specifically so you would spend the rest of the relationship chasing it. The love bomb phase also serves another purpose. It is reconnaissance. While you are floating on the attention, they are studying you. They are learning what makes you feel most seen, what your wounds are, what your fears look like, what you need that you never fully received. They are building a psychological profile of you without you realizing it. Every vulnerable thing you share in those intimate early hours becomes a tool they will use against you later. The compliments they gave you will become the insults they craft. The dreams you told them about will become the things they undermine. The love bombing does not end because they stop caring. It ends because the purpose is achieved. You are bonded, you are invested, and now the real dynamic can begin. Recognizing love bombing is not about becoming suspicious of affection. Genuine love grows at a pace that allows both people to actually know each other. What is being described here is a pace so fast and so intense that it overrides your judgment. If someone makes you feel like the most important person on earth within 2 weeks, the healthiest question you can ask yourself is why they need you to feel that so quickly. Intermittent reinforcement. The most powerful conditioning system ever discovered is not reward. It is not punishment either. It is the unpredictable alternation between the two, and it creates a compulsion so strong that laboratory animals have chosen it to the point of starvation over predictable food sources. This is intermittent reinforcement, and it is the psychological engine behind every addictive relationship, every slot machine, and every manipulator who keeps people trapped for years. The pattern works like this. Someone treats you well for a period of time. You feel safe, valued, happy. Then, without clear reason, the warmth disappears. They become cold, distant, critical, or completely emotionally unavailable. You spend enormous mental and emotional energy trying to understand what changed, what you did wrong, how to get back to the good version, and then, just when you are on the edge of giving up, the warmth returns. The relief you feel in that moment is not ordinary happiness. It is the chemical equivalent of a slot machine paying out. Your brain releases dopamine in a way that is measurably more intense than it would be if the person had simply been consistently good to you. Consistent kindness, ironically, produces far weaker emotional bonding than this kind of unpredictable cycling. Manipulators who use this do not always do so with complete conscious awareness, though some absolutely do. What they understand, at some level, is that pulling away creates panic in someone who is attached to them, and that returning after pulling away creates intense gratitude and relief that strengthens the bond rather than weakening it. The person on the receiving end becomes focused almost entirely on managing the relationship to prevent the cold phase and extend the warm phase. They become hypervigilant, always monitoring, always adjusting, always trying to be enough. This hypervigilance is itself deeply exhausting and erodes a person's sense of self over time because all of their internal attention is directed outward toward the other person rather than inward toward themselves. The exit from this pattern is notoriously difficult precisely because the intermittent warmth provides just enough positive reinforcement to override rational evaluation. Every time you are about to leave, a good moment arrives. And that good moment, because it follows a painful period, feels more meaningful than it actually is. Understanding this mechanism does not make it easy to break, but it does give you something critical. When you see the pattern rather than just feeling the feelings, you can begin to make choices from your rational mind rather than your conditioned nervous system. Gaslighting reality? There is a particular kind of confusion that is unlike any other confusion you will experience in your life. It is not the confusion of a complicated problem or an unfamiliar subject. It is the confusion of not being able to trust what you yourself witnessed, felt, said, or remember. This is what gaslighting produces, and it is one of the most psychologically destructive tools that manipulative people use because it does not just damage your relationship with the person doing it. It damages your relationship with your own mind. The term comes from a 1944 film in which a husband systematically manipulates his wife into believing she is losing her sanity, partly by dimming the gas-powered lights in their home and then denying that the light has changed at all. The structure of gaslighting in real life follows this same basic architecture. You experience something. You report what you experienced. The other person tells you that what you experienced is wrong, exaggerated, imagined, or a product of your own instability. Over repeated experiences of this, you begin to defer to their version of reality rather than your own. The methods used to accomplish this are varied and often layered together. Direct denial is the most obvious form, where they flatly tell you something did not happen the way you remember it, or did not happen at all. Then there is the minimizing form, where they acknowledge something happened but make you feel irrational for caring about it. Then there is the shifting blame form, where you're bringing up what happened becomes the problem, not the thing itself. There is also the weaponized diagnosis form, where they use something about your personality, your history, or your emotional state to dismiss everything you say as a symptom of your own issues rather than a reasonable response to theirs. One of the most dangerous things about gaslighting is that it often takes place gradually, across many small instances, each of which seems minor on its own. By the time the pattern is large enough to be obvious, the person being gaslit has already internalized so much self-doubt that they struggle to trust the very evidence in front of them. Rebuilding after gaslighting involves recognizing that the confusion you felt was not a sign of weakness or instability. It was the predictable result of a sustained campaign to disconnect you from your own perception. The truth was always closer to what you felt than to what you were told to feel. Silent treatment. Most people instinctively understand that yelling and insults are forms of emotional abuse. Far fewer recognize that silence can be deployed with equal precision and equal damage. The silent treatment, when used strategically and deliberately rather than as a natural need for space, is a tool of punishment and control that exploits one of the most fundamental human fears, the fear of abandonment and disconnection. When a person who matters to you suddenly withdraws all communication, warmth, and acknowledgement, your nervous system registers something close to a threat to survival. Human beings are wired for social connection. We evolved in groups where exclusion meant danger. The silent treatment activates these ancient alarm systems and creates a psychological urgency that is entirely disproportionate to the rational significance of whatever triggered the silence. The manipulator knows this. They know that silence costs them very little while extracting enormous emotional energy from the other person. While you are spiraling, overthinking, replaying every interaction, questioning your behavior, and considering whether to apologize for things you are not sure you even did, they are calm. They hold the power in that silence, and they feel it. The dynamic almost always follows a predictable path. Something happens, real or constructed, that gives them reason to withdraw. They go silent. You pursue. You apologize, explain, reach out, ask what is wrong. Your pursuit validates their position, confirms that the silence is working, and trains you to manage their emotions at the expense of your own. When they finally end the silence, the relief is so great that you feel gratitude toward the person who was punishing you, which is exactly the psychological position they wanted you in. It is important to distinguish this from healthy boundary setting. Someone who needs time to calm down before a difficult conversation and communicates that clearly is doing something entirely different from someone who disappears for days as punishment, only reappearing when they are satisfied that you have been sufficiently destabilized. The difference lives in intention and communication. Healthy withdrawal says, "I need space and I will come back." Strategic silence says nothing at all because the uncertainty is the weapon. Triangulation control. One of the most efficient ways to manipulate a person in a relationship is to introduce a third party, real or implied, whose presence creates insecurity, jealousy, and competition. This is triangulation, and it is used across all types of relationships, including romantic, familial, friendship, and professional ones. The basic structure involves a manipulator positioning themselves at the top of a triangle, while two other people or groups are placed at opposing corners, each competing for the manipulator's favor, attention, or approval. The genius of triangulation from the manipulator's perspective is that it requires very little direct effort. Simply mentioning that someone else appreciates them, agrees with them, or would be a better fit is enough to activate insecurity in the target and redirect energy toward appeasement and competition rather than critical evaluation. In romantic relationships, triangulation often takes the form of constantly referencing an ex, someone who is interested in them, or a hypothetical standard that you are perpetually falling short of. They will describe how their ex never had a problem with a certain behavior, or mention that someone else expressed interest in them in a way designed to make you feel replaceable, which sharpens your effort to prove your value. The psychological effect of this is significant and compounding. When you are focused on competing with a third party, you lose focus on evaluating whether the relationship itself is worth being in. Your energy is redirected from self-worth to comparative worth, and you begin to measure your value through the manipulator's eyes rather than your own. In family systems, triangulation is often used by a parent or dominant family member who routes communication and allegiance through themselves rather than allowing direct relationships between others. This creates dependency on the central figure and keeps others divided and manageable. Recognizing triangulation involves noticing when a third party is consistently introduced specifically at moments of conflict or dissatisfaction, when their purpose seems less to share genuine information and more to produce feelings of inadequacy or competition in you. Future faking. There is a type of promise that functions not as a commitment but as a sedative. It is offered not because the person intends to follow through, but because the vision of the future they are painting serves an immediate purpose, which is to manage your dissatisfaction with the present. This is future faking, and it is one of the most commonly used tools by manipulative individuals because it is nearly costless to execute and extraordinarily effective at keeping people in situations they would otherwise leave. The mechanics are straightforward. You are unhappy. You are beginning to question the relationship, the arrangement, or the dynamic. You are edging toward the kind of clarity that would lead you to make a decision about your own life. And then the person who benefits from you staying produces a vision of something better that is right around the corner. They talk about the trip you will take together, the place you will eventually live, the way things will be once this current difficult period passes, the commitment they will make when the timing is right, the change they will make once things settle down. These promises are delivered with enough specificity and warmth to make them feel real and enough vagueness to make them impossible to hold accountable. The future they are describing never arrives because it was never actually a plan. It was a tool, used precisely at the moment when you needed something to hold on to. What makes future faking so effective is that human beings are extraordinarily capable of living an anticipated experience. The brain processes a vivid, believable image of a desired future in a way that produces genuine positive emotion in the present. The manipulator understands, consciously or not, that giving you this vision costs them nothing while buying them time, continued access to you, and the suspension of any decision you might otherwise make. Pattern recognition is essential here. If the promises are always just ahead of wherever you currently are, if the timeline perpetually shifts, if the vision is invoked most reliably at exactly the moments when you are about to reach a decision, you are likely dealing with future faking rather than genuine intention. DARVO defense. When you confront a person who has caused you harm, one of the most disorienting responses they can deliver is to immediately flip the situation so that you become the aggressor and they become the victim. This response pattern has a name. It is called DARVO, which stands for deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. It is one of the most studied and documented manipulation responses used by people who are unwilling or unable to take accountability. And it is devastating precisely because it hijacks the language and emotional posture of genuine victimhood. The sequence begins with denial. Whatever you have raised is flatly rejected. They did not do it, or it did not happen the way you say, or you are misremembering. If denial alone is insufficient, the next phase is attack. Rather than addressing the content of what you have raised, they shift to attacking your character, your motives, your mental state, or your behavior. Now you are defending yourself instead of being heard. And then comes the reversal. Having attacked you sufficiently to shift the emotional temperature of the interaction, they position themselves as the one who has been wronged. Your confrontation becomes the crime. Your upset becomes their suffering. The very act of raising a legitimate concern is reframed as an act of aggression against them. By the end of this sequence, which can happen in minutes, the original issue has completely disappeared. You are now in the position of apologizing or defending rather than being heard and responded to. If you are someone with a naturally empathic temperament, the reversal is especially effective against you because your instinct when someone appears hurt is to focus on their pain. DARVO exploits this instinct and uses it to permanently redirect any accountability conversation into a dynamics where you are managing their feelings about your having concerns rather than having your concerns addressed. Learning to recognize DARVO does not mean becoming hard or suspicious. It means learning to stay grounded in the original issue even when the conversation floods with emotional distraction and redirection. False scarcity trick. There is a biological circuit in the human brain that responds to scarcity with intensified desire. This is not a modern quirk. It is an ancient survival mechanism that served our ancestors well in environments where resources were genuinely limited. But this mechanism is easily hijacked, and it is exploited constantly in advertising, in relationships, in negotiations, and in social dynamics by anyone who understands that the perception of scarcity creates urgency that bypasses rational evaluation. The basic principle is simple. The moment something appears to be running out or becoming unavailable, it immediately seems more valuable than it did when it was freely accessible. Limited time offers, last one in stock, this offer expires tonight, they all exploit the same psychological circuit. In relationships, false scarcity is weaponized through implied replaceability. The message, delivered subtly or not so subtly, is that the person or thing being offered will not be available forever and that someone else is ready to step in if you do not act now. This creates competitive pressure that suppresses reflection and accelerates commitment. In sales contexts, artificial deadlines and manufactured limited availability are standard techniques precisely because they work so consistently across such a wide range of people. The rational mind knows that if a deal is being rushed and pressure is being applied to prevent you from thinking too carefully, something about that pressure should itself be evaluated. But the urgency sensation that scarcity produces fires faster than rational evaluation, which is why the technique persists. Protecting yourself from false scarcity involves inserting a deliberate pause at precisely the moment when urgency is highest. The genuine opportunities in life rarely collapse the moment you take 24 hours to think. The pressure to decide immediately, without reflection, without consultation, is almost always a sign that the decision benefits someone else more than it benefits you. Reciprocity trap. Reciprocity is one of the most powerful social contracts in human civilization. When someone does something for us, we feel a deep psychological obligation to return the gesture. This instinct is so strong that it operates even when the original gift or favor was unsolicited, even when we did not want it, and even when we suspect the person knew exactly what they were doing when they offered it. Manipulators who understand this use it systematically to create obligation, indebtedness, and compliance in people who would not otherwise cooperate with their requests. The structure is classic. The manipulator gives something, a favor, a gift, their time, information, praise, or connection. This giving is framed as generous and unconditional. The target feels grateful, and the social pressure of reciprocity activates immediately at a subconscious level. Then, when the manipulator makes a request, the person who received the initial favor finds it psychologically very difficult to refuse. Saying no feels like a betrayal of the social contract. The discomfort of that feeling is usually greater than the discomfort of complying with a request they would have otherwise declined. This is used in fundraising when organizations send small gifts before asking for donations. In business negotiations, when one party offers a concession, knowing the other party will feel obligated to match it. In social settings, when someone performs repeated favors to build up a reserve of felt obligation they can later call in. And in romantic or personal contexts, when grand gestures are used not as expressions of genuine affection, but as tools to create emotional debt. The antidote to this is recognizing that a gift you did not ask for and do not genuinely want does not create a debt. Accepting something does not mean you owe something in return, particularly when the giving was strategic rather than generous. Real generosity asks for nothing. Strategic giving always has a price, even if that price is not disclosed at the time of the transaction. Sunk cost grip. One of the most effective prisons a person can be kept in is one they built themselves from the accumulated weight of their own investment. This is the sunk cost effect, and it is the psychological phenomenon that keeps people in jobs they hate, relationships that harm them, and decisions that stopped serving them long ago, simply because they have already given so much to these things that walking away feels like it would make all of that giving meaningless. The name comes from economics, where a sunk cost refers to resources already spent that cannot be recovered regardless of future choices. Rational economic theory holds that sunk costs should be irrelevant to future decisions because they are gone either way. But human psychology does not work this way. We feel the weight of what we have already given as a reason to continue giving, even when continuing makes our situation worse rather than better. Manipulators who understand this dynamic can exploit it simply by encouraging and acknowledging your investment. Every time you give more, sacrifice more, endure more, and receive language that frames this as evidence of your commitment and love, the invisible chain gets heavier. Because now you have given even more, and walking away would mean all of that was wasted. The truth that the sunk cost effect obscures is that what you have already given is gone regardless of what you decide next. The question is never, what have I already put in? The question is, given who I am and what I want, what is the best decision I can make with the time and energy I still have available to me? Staying in a harmful situation to justify past investment does not honor the investment. It simply adds more cost to it. The most empowering reframing of the sunk cost trap is recognizing that leaving is not an admission that the past was wasted. It is a decision to stop adding to a loss. Identity mirroring. There is a phase in the early stages of interaction with certain manipulative individuals where the connection feels almost supernatural. You seem to have the same values, the same humor, the same references, the same wounds, the same vision of what life should look like. The conversation flows without effort. You feel understood in a way you rarely have. You feel, perhaps for the first time, like someone truly sees you. What you are actually experiencing is a highly skilled technique called mirroring, where a person reflects your own personality, values, and preferences back at you in order to create the sensation of deep compatibility that is not organically present. The technique relies on a simple truth about human attraction. We are most drawn to people who seem to be like us. Shared identity creates trust. Perceived similarity accelerates bonding. Manipulators who use identity mirroring have usually developed, through experience or deliberate study, the ability to rapidly identify what someone values most about themselves and their worldview, and then reflect those things back as if they naturally hold them too. They listen carefully in early conversations, not because they are genuinely interested, but because they are building a map of who you are, so they can construct a version of themselves that fits perfectly against it. The mirrored version of them that you fall for is in many ways a portrait of yourself. This is why the eventual revelation of who they actually are feels so jarring and so disorienting. The person you thought you knew was not a real person, it was a reflection. When the mirror is removed, you are left not just with the grief of losing someone, but with the disturbing question of whether the connection you felt was ever real at all. It was real in the sense that you genuinely experienced it, but it was not mutual in the way you believed. What you were connecting with was your own reflection, not another person's truth. Blame-shifting art. Accountability is one of the things a certain category of person will protect themselves from at almost any psychological cost. For these individuals, the admission of fault is not simply embarrassing, it is existentially threatening to a self-image built on the belief that they are not the cause of problems. And so, rather than processing responsibility, they have developed extraordinary skill in redirecting it. Blame shifting is the technique by which a person responds to a complaint or a consequence of their behavior by redirecting focus onto something you did, something about you, or something in the surrounding context that they can position as the real cause. The shift is often so fast and so fluid that the person doing the shifting may not even be conscious of the mechanism. They genuinely experience themselves as responding to your provocation rather than being held responsible for their own action. The sequence typically works like this. You raise something they did. Before you can finish or be acknowledged, the conversation has pivoted to something you did, something you always do, something about your tone, your history, your issues, your unreasonable expectations. By the end of the conversation, you have either dropped the original issue to defend yourself against the counterattack, or you have apologized for something you did not intend to apologize for, or you have simply given up because the exhaustion of the conversation is greater than the value of the resolution. Over time, consistent blame shifting produces a specific effect in the person on the receiving end. They begin to preemptively self-blame. They start every difficult conversation already bracing for the reversal, already softening their own position, already hedging their own perception of events. They have been trained by repeated experience that raising anything leads to being blamed for something, and so they stop raising things. This is, functionally, the goal of the technique, not to resolve conflict, but to eliminate it by eliminating your willingness to introduce it. Moving goalposts. One of the most demoralizing experiences available to a human being is working very hard toward a standard, meeting that standard, and then discovering that the standard has silently shifted to somewhere you cannot quite reach. This is the moving goalpost, and while it sometimes occurs accidentally due to unclear expectations, in the hands of manipulative individuals or institutions, it is a deliberate tool used to keep people perpetually striving, perpetually falling short, and perpetually in need of the approval of the person who controls the definition of success. The dynamic is common in workplaces where a manager sets a target, an employee hits the target, and the response is not acknowledgement but a new, slightly higher target without recognition of what was already achieved. It appears in personal relationships where a partner expresses dissatisfaction. You adjust your behavior to address that dissatisfaction, and the dissatisfaction either remains or shifts to a different complaint. It appears in parenting dynamics where a child can never quite be enough for a parent who needs the child striving to feel needed or powerful. The psychological damage of this pattern accumulates across time. Because the goalpost never stays still, the person chasing it begins to believe that the problem is not the moving target, but their own inadequacy. They conclude that they are simply not good enough, not capable enough, not lovable enough, rather than recognizing that the conditions they are working within were designed to prevent satisfaction. This self-blame is the intended product of the system. A person who believes they are the problem is easier to manage than a person who accurately identifies the system as the problem. Recognizing moving goalposts requires keeping an external record of what was asked, what was delivered, and how the response compared to the stated expectation. When the pattern becomes visible across multiple instances, the conclusion becomes harder to avoid. Projection weaponized. There is a psychological defense mechanism in which a person unconsciously attributes their own unacceptable thoughts, feelings, or behaviors to someone else rather than acknowledging them in themselves. This is called projection, and in its ordinary unconscious form, it is a common human response to internal material that feels too threatening to own. But there is a darker and more deliberate version of projection that functions as a manipulation tool, where a person accuses others of the exact things they themselves are doing, not as an unconscious defense, but as a strategy to create confusion, preemptive denial, and misdirection. When someone who is being dishonest constantly accuses you of lying, it accomplishes several things simultaneously. It places you on the defensive, where you are busy proving your own honesty rather than examining theirs. It creates a narrative framework in which the theme of dishonesty is attached to you rather than to them, so that if the truth eventually surfaces, the prior accusations create doubt in the minds of observers about whose dishonesty is real, and it gives them a degree of plausible deniability, because the very accusation they are making about you is the accusation you might most reasonably make about them, and making it after they have already made it about you makes you appear to be retaliating rather than observing. Weaponized projection is particularly common in cases of infidelity, where the person who is cheating often becomes the most suspicious and accusatory of their partner. It is also common in financial manipulation, where the person diverting resources accuses their partner or associate of financial irresponsibility. Recognizing it requires a willingness to notice the pattern of what someone consistently accuses you of and ask honestly whether that accusation describes your behavior or theirs. Strategic vulnerability. Vulnerability is, in most human contexts, one of the most powerful tools for building genuine connection. When someone shares something real and difficult about themselves, it creates intimacy, trust, and reciprocal openness. But vulnerability can be performed, and performed vulnerability, deployed at the right moment and in the right amount, can be one of the most effective manipulation techniques available because it exploits the human instinct to protect and care for someone who appears wounded or open. Strategic vulnerability is used to accomplish several goals. It can be deployed to preemptively disarm someone who is preparing to confront or challenge. If you are building up to a difficult conversation and the other person suddenly shares something painful about their past or their struggles, your confrontation impulse is likely to pause. The emotional climate shifts from confrontation to care, and the conversation you planned does not happen. It can be used to accelerate intimacy and trust in ways that serve the person sharing rather than the relationship itself. Premature and excessive disclosure of personal pain or difficulty creates a sensation of closeness that has not actually been earned through time and mutual experience. It can be used to create obligation. When someone makes you their only confidant, their only safe person, their only one who understands, they are placing you in a position where leaving feels like abandonment of someone fragile. The difference between genuine vulnerability and strategic vulnerability is not always immediately visible. Genuine vulnerability is proportionate to the level of relationship. It does not always arrive at convenient moments. It does not consistently shift the emotional direction of conversations in ways that benefit the person sharing. And genuine vulnerability does not require your silence about your own needs in exchange for the privilege of being trusted with theirs. Isolation engineering. Control over another person is much easier to maintain when that person has no external reference points against which to measure their experience. Friends, family, colleagues, and community all serve the function of providing perspective, reality checks, alternative sources of support, and the social infrastructure through which a person maintains their sense of self and their access to help. A manipulator who understands this will work systematically to reduce or eliminate access to these external sources, not always through direct prohibition, but often through far subtler means. The campaign begins with framing. The people in your life are gradually reframed as problems. Your friends do not truly understand you the way the manipulator does. Your family is too controlling, too judgmental, too much of a negative influence. The colleague you trust has their own agenda. The therapist you see is putting ideas in your head that are not healthy for the relationship. Each individual critique may seem plausible. You have friends who are imperfect. Your family does have complicated dynamics. Over time, however, the consistent direction of these framing efforts becomes clear. Every relationship outside of the primary one is being eroded. Sometimes isolation is accomplished through time management rather than direct criticism. The relationship simply demands so much of your time and emotional energy that there is nothing left for anyone else. Plans are made and then changed. Conflict arises every time you prioritize others. You gradually stop initiating with people outside the relationship because the cost is too high. The result, in either case, is the same. You are left in a world that is functionally reduced to one person, and that person both caused the reduction and now controls the supply of everything you need. Isolation is one of the clearest markers of a controlling relationship because it is both a means of control and evidence that control is the goal. Emotional blackmail. There is a form of influence that weaponizes your love, your empathy, or your fear, using it as leverage to produce the behavior the other person wants from you. This is emotional blackmail, and it is recognizable not by how loud or dramatic it is, but by the internal experience of the person on the receiving end. That internal experience is a feeling of being trapped between what you want to do and what you are being pressured to do through threat, guilt, or the implication of consequences. Emotional blackmail typically presents in a few distinct forms. There is the fear-based form, where explicit or implied consequences are attached to your failure to comply. If you leave, something will happen to me. If you do not do this, things will get very bad. If you tell anyone about this, you will regret it. The consequence may be directed at the blackmailer themselves or at you, but the structure is the same. Your compliance is being purchased through fear of an outcome. Then there is the guilt-based form, where your failure to comply is positioned as a moral failing or a betrayal of care. After everything I have done for you, if you loved me, you would. I cannot believe you could be so selfish. These statements attach your identity as a good person to your compliance and make non-compliance feel like confirmation that you are bad, cold, or uncaring. Then there is the obligation form, which uses what you owe or what is fair as its mechanism. The debt being called in may be real or manufactured, but its purpose is to narrow your sense of available options. Learning to recognize emotional blackmail requires distinguishing between someone expressing genuine feelings and someone using feelings as leverage. The difference is in the direction. Genuine feeling expression is informational. Emotional blackmail is directional. It ends in a demand. Covert contracts. A covert contract is an agreement you never agreed to. It is a transaction that exists entirely in one person's mind, where they have decided that if they perform a certain action or fulfill a certain role, they are owed a specific return. The other person in this supposed transaction is unaware that any deal has been struck. They are simply living their life, receiving what they believe is freely offered, and unwittingly accumulating a debt they do not know exists. Covert contracts are the invisible architecture beneath a particular kind of resentment. The person operating under them is often seen as extraordinarily giving, generous, and selfless. They give and accommodate and sacrifice. And then, at some point, the debt they have been keeping track of in their own mind comes due, and they present the bill to someone who has no memory of signing anything. The giving that looked like generosity is revealed to have been transactional all along. The accommodation that looked like love was actually a negotiation, and when the expected return does not materialize, the anger that emerges is confusing and destabilizing to the person being held responsible for something they never agreed to. This pattern is not always malicious. In many cases, the person operating under covert contracts is genuinely unaware that they are doing it. They have an expectation so deeply assumed that it does not feel like an expectation to them. It feels like an obvious and natural return. But whether conscious or unconscious, the effect is the same. One person is blamed for violating an agreement they were never party to. The remedy for covert contracts is a discipline of explicit communication. If you want something in return for what you are giving, you have to say so before you give it. Anything given without that clarity is a gift, not a transaction. Negative reinforcement loop. Most people understand punishment as something unpleasant that is applied to discourage behavior. Fewer people recognize the power of negative reinforcement, which is not the application of something unpleasant, but the removal of something unpleasant as a reward for desired behavior. This distinction is important because negative reinforcement can produce some of the strongest and most persistent behavioral patterns available, and it is used, often unconsciously, by manipulative individuals to train the people around them. The structure in a relational context looks like this. A person creates or sustains an unpleasant condition: tension, coldness, conflict, criticism, sulking, emotional withdrawal. The target of this condition then performs some behavior, apology, compliance, appeasement, or submission, and the unpleasant condition is removed. The relief that follows is powerful and immediate. And just as in laboratory conditioning, the behavior that preceded the relief becomes more likely to occur again in the future. Over repeated cycles, the person on the receiving end has been trained to manage the other person's emotional states because doing so reliably removes discomfort. They have not been trained through rewards for good behavior, but through the removal of punishment for compliance. What makes this particularly effective as a control mechanism is that the person doing the conditioning does not need to articulate any rules. The training happens through pattern, not instruction. You learn what behaviors remove the unpleasant condition, and you learn to produce those behaviors automatically, even before the unpleasant condition fully develops, because your nervous system has learned to anticipate and preempt it. This is how a person can end up walking on eggshells without being able to articulate exactly what they are afraid of. Minimizing your pain. There is a subtle form of invalidation that does not deny your experience outright, but instead contextualizes it in ways that make having it seem unreasonable. This is minimization, and it operates by placing your pain, your concern, your reaction, or your need beside something else, a worse situation elsewhere, your own past overreactions, the smallness of the trigger, or the sensitivity of your nature, in ways that make your current feelings seem disproportionate or embarrassing. The message of minimization is never delivered as direct dismissal. It arrives softened, often accompanied by a reasonable-sounding explanation. There are people with real problems. You always make a big deal out of small things. I have seen you get like this before, and it always passes. This is not that serious. What minimization accomplishes is the removal of your right to your own experience without the confrontation of directly telling you that your experience is wrong. It is a more socially palatable form of dismissal that leaves you questioning your own proportionality rather than the other person's response. When minimization is used consistently in a relationship, it produces a specific kind of silence, not the silence of someone who has nothing to say, but the silence of someone who has learned that saying things leads to feeling worse about themselves. You begin to pre-screen your feelings before expressing them, running them through a filter that asks whether this is big enough to mention, whether you are overreacting again, whether the response you will get is worth the cost of raising it. This self-censorship is the goal of the minimization. A person who does not bring their needs to the relationship can be more easily managed and more easily dismissed. Manufactured crisis. Some individuals have an intuitive or practiced ability to generate chaos at precisely the moments when calm is most needed, or when you are about to exercise your own independent judgment. The manufactured crisis is a destabilization technique in which a dramatic event, escalation, or emotional emergency is introduced into a situation specifically to redirect attention, create dependency, or prevent a decision or action that would not benefit the manipulator. The crisis does not always look manufactured. It may present as a genuine emergency, a health scare, an explosive emotional breakdown, a sudden devastating disclosure, a financial emergency, or a conflict with a third party that requires your immediate attention. The timing is the tell. These events have a pattern of occurring at moments of your clarity or independence. You are about to have an important conversation, make a decision, spend time with someone else, or gain perspective in some way that threatens the dynamic, and suddenly something that demands all of your energy presents itself. By the time the crisis resolves, the moment of clarity has passed, and the decision or conversation has been indefinitely postponed. Over time, repeated exposure to manufactured crisis produces a specific kind of psychological exhaustion that makes sustained independent thinking very difficult. Your system is perpetually in reactive mode, dealing with the immediate and urgent, never having enough space or stability to evaluate the overall pattern. Identifying manufactured crisis requires stepping back from the immediate event and examining the timing honestly. Not every inconvenient crisis is manufactured, but a pattern in which emergencies consistently appear at moments of your potential independence or clarity is information about the dynamic rather than evidence of coincidence. Word salad trap. There is a particular experience that happens in conversations with certain people, where by the end of a long exchange you have no clear memory of what was actually said, no resolution of the original issue, and a vague but pervasive sense of confusion and fatigue. You went in with a clear point, and you came out somehow, having lost it without being able to explain exactly what happened. This experience is the product of a communication style sometimes called word salad, in which responses are designed not to communicate, but to obscure, deflect, overwhelm, and exhaust. Word salad is not random rambling. It is strategically incoherent. The person using it will respond to your direct statement or question with a flood of tangential information, counter-accusations, philosophical diversions, emotional escalations, unrelated history, and reframings, all delivered with enough energy and apparent conviction that it is very hard to interrupt or redirect. By the time the flood subsides, you have forgotten what you originally raised, or you are so tired from the sustained effort of following the thread that you no longer have the energy to return to it. This technique is used to prevent accountability conversations from landing. If a direct statement or question cannot be answered honestly without cost to the speaker, making the conversation itself impossible to navigate serves the same purpose as a refusal to answer. You cannot pin down something that will not stay still long enough to be examined. Protecting yourself from word salad requires preparation and boundary setting in conversation. Writing down the specific point you want addressed before the conversation begins, returning to that point after each diversion, and being willing to name the pattern when you see it happening can help. So can the willingness to end a conversation and return to it later, rather than allowing exhaustion to close it for you. Trauma bond chain. A trauma bond is one of the most counterintuitive phenomena in the psychology of relationships. It describes the powerful emotional attachment that forms between a person and their abuser, an attachment that in many cases is stronger and more difficult to break than bonds formed in healthy relationships. This seems impossible to the person observing from the outside and even to the person experiencing it. How can you feel most attached to the person who is causing you the most harm? The answer lies in the neurochemistry of intermittent reinforcement combined with the physiology of shared intense experience. Bonds formed under conditions of alternating danger and relief, fear and safety, pain and comfort, engage the nervous system and the attachment system in ways that routine positive experience does not. The cycle of tension, incident, and reconciliation or apparent remorse creates a continuous emotional intensity that can be mistaken for depth of connection. The comfort received from the abuser during the reconciliation phase, because it follows pain caused by the same person, produces relief that is neurochemically similar to the relief of an addict receiving their substance. The person who hurt you is also the person who can make you feel better, and this dual role creates a dependency that feels like love but operates more like addiction. Trauma bonds are further reinforced by the cognitive dissonance required to reconcile the abuse with the attachment. Because it is psychologically intolerable to believe that you deeply love someone who is harming you, the mind often resolves the tension by minimizing the harm, excusing the behavior, or finding reasons why the good moments are the truth and the bad moments are the exception. Understanding trauma bonding is not about feeling foolish for the attachment. It is about recognizing that the attachment itself was engineered by conditions that exploit the deepest human needs for connection and safety. False apology cycle. An apology that does not lead to changed behavior is not an apology. It is a performance designed to reset the emotional temperature of a relationship without the cost of actual accountability or change. False apologies are among the most common tools used by manipulative individuals to manage conflict because they provide all the social and relational benefits of remorse without requiring any of its actual content. There are several varieties. The conditional apology, "I am sorry you felt that way," which apologizes for your response rather than their behavior. The deflecting apology, "I am sorry, but you have to understand that you also," which immediately inverts the accountability. The theatrical apology, delivered with such visible emotion and apparent depth that the sheer performance of remorse serves as its own proof. And the strategic apology, issued precisely at the moment when accountability would otherwise be unavoidable, as a preemptive move that frames any continued grievance on your part as excessive or unfair, given that they have already apologized. What all of these have in common is the absence of the thing that makes an apology meaningful, which is evidence of genuine understanding of the harm caused and commitment to changing the behavior that caused it. An apology followed within days or weeks by the same behavior is information. It is telling you that the apology was a tool for managing your reaction rather than an expression of genuine remorse. Receiving apologies gracefully while continuing to observe behavior is one of the most important skills available in navigating relationships with people who may not have the capacity or willingness to change. Foot in door. If you want someone to comply with a large request, begin with a small one. This is the core principle behind the foot in the door technique, one of the most consistently replicated findings in social psychology, first formally studied in 1966 by Friedman and Fraser, but understood and practiced by skilled persuaders across all of human history. The principle works because of a phenomenon called commitment and consistency. Once a person has agreed to something, even something small, they develop a psychological need to remain consistent with that initial position. Saying yes once makes saying yes again feel more natural and more aligned with who they believe themselves to be. The initial small request is not the goal, it is the setup. It establishes you as someone who agrees. It creates a self-image as cooperative, helpful, or aligned with whoever made the request, and subsequent, larger requests benefit from that established self-image. In commercial contexts, this plays out across everything from free trials to initial low-cost offers to simple petition, signing campaigns that are known to predict future charitable giving. In personal and political contexts, it plays out in the gradual escalation of demands within relationships, where initial small concessions expand across time into patterns of compliance that the person would never have agreed to if the full picture had been presented at the beginning. The defense against this technique is not reflexive refusal, but awareness that the size of a first request is not always its actual purpose. When evaluating whether to comply with something small, it is worth asking what kind of precedent compliance sets and what larger requests might be made more comfortable by this initial yes. Door in face. The The counterintuitive companion to the foot in the door technique is the door in the face, which works through an entirely different psychological mechanism but is equally effective in producing compliance. In this technique, a person first makes a very large request, one that is almost certainly going to be refused. When it is refused, they immediately follow with a more reasonable request, which was the request they actually wanted you to comply with all along. The psychology at work here involves two interlocking principles. The first is contrast. The second request, placed against the backdrop of the first, seems far more reasonable than it would if presented on its own. Our evaluations are always comparative rather than absolute, and an ask that follows an extreme one benefits from that contrast regardless of whether the ask itself is actually reasonable in objective terms. The second principle is reciprocal concession. When the requester scales back their ask, there is a social pressure that activates in the person who refused. The reduction in demand feels like a concession, and the principle of reciprocity then creates pressure to also make a concession, which in this case means agreeing to the second request. The technique is used in negotiation, sales, fundraising, and everyday persuasion. An important awareness point is that when someone opens with an extreme position, they are not necessarily expressing what they actually want. They may be setting up a contrast. The genuine ask is often the one that comes after the initial refusal and seems reasonable only by comparison to what preceded it. Authority illusion, one of the most durable shortcuts the human brain uses, is deference to authority. When someone who appears to possess expertise, status, credentials, or institutional backing tells us something, we are biologically inclined to reduce our own scrutiny and increase our acceptance. This is not irrational. In a world where no individual can have deep knowledge in every domain, deferring to those with demonstrated expertise in specific areas is often efficient and sensible. But the mechanism is exploited constantly by those who understand that the appearance of authority produces trust before its accuracy has been verified. The exploitation takes several forms. There is the credential display, where someone lists or implies qualifications as a preface to claims that those qualifications do not actually validate. There is the confident presentation, where the tone, vocabulary, and manner of certainty associated with genuine expertise are performed in the absence of the expertise itself. There is the institutional affiliation, where an association with a credible organization is used to borrow credibility for positions the organization itself might not endorse. And there is the title usage, where professional or academic titles are attached to opinions or claims in fields where the title does not confer relevant expertise. Understanding that authority signals and authority legitimacy are not the same thing is the beginning of the defense. A doctor speaking about medicine warrants deference. The same doctor speaking about economics does not carry the same warrant. Genuine expertise is domain-specific, and the social signals of authority transfer to domains where they do not belong. Asking what specific knowledge or evidence supports a claim, rather than simply who is making it, is the most reliable corrective to authority exploitation. Confirmation bias exploit. Every human mind is subject to a structural preference for information that confirms what it already believes over information that contradicts it. This is not a character flaw. It is a cognitive feature that allows us to function without being paralyzed by constant reevaluation of every held belief. But it is a feature that can be deliberately exploited by those who want to control what you believe or what decisions you make. The exploitation begins with identification. Before a manipulator can use your confirmation bias, they need to know what you already believe. What are your values? What are your fears? What is your existing narrative about yourself or the world? Once this is established, they feed you information that confirms and amplifies that existing narrative, whether or not the information is accurate. Because you are primed to accept confirming information with less scrutiny, the information lands with a feeling of recognition rather than suspicion. It feels like learning something you already knew, which is one of the most psychologically satisfying sensations available. This technique is used in political messaging, advertising, cult recruitment, and manipulative relationships. It is particularly powerful in combination with the simultaneous suppression or dismissal of contradictory information, which is reframed not as evidence requiring consideration, but as the product of bias, ignorance, or bad intent on the part of whoever is offering it. You end up in an epistemic environment where everything that confirms your existing belief system is presented as truth, and everything that challenges it is presented as attack. The most practical defense is the discipline of actively seeking out the strongest version of arguments against your own positions and evaluating them honestly before dismissing them. Pity as weapon, sympathy is one of the most genuinely compassionate responses available to human beings. When someone is suffering, the impulse to extend care, modify your own behavior in their favor, or simply stay present with them is evidence of deep humanity. But this impulse, precisely because it is so reliable and so strong, can be deliberately triggered by someone who is not actually in the distress they are portraying. The pity play is the technique of presenting oneself as a victim, as suffering, as helpless, or as in crisis, specifically to produce in another person the sympathy response that will translate into compliance, continued engagement, or relief from accountability. Some individuals have developed an extraordinarily sophisticated ability to identify the moments when they are at risk of losing control of a situation, being held accountable, or facing genuine consequences, and to produce a sympathetic presentation at exactly those moments. The presentation does not need to be entirely false. Real suffering is genuine, but the deployment of that suffering at strategic moments, in strategic ways, for the purpose of producing a specific response rather than genuine connection, transforms it from vulnerability into manipulation. The pity play is especially effective against empathic people because their instinct to comfort someone in apparent pain overrides their evaluation of whether the pain is being genuinely expressed or strategically performed. Over time, a person who is repeatedly manipulated through pity learns to feel guilty for having needs of their own because their needs have been consistently outweighed by the needs of the person performing helplessness. Recognizing this pattern does not require becoming cold or suspicious of genuine suffering. It requires noticing the timing and consistency of when vulnerability is displayed and what it consistently produces in terms of how the relationship or situation is redirected. Devaluation phase. After the elevation of the idealization phase, something shifts. The person who made you feel like the most valuable and interesting human being they had ever encountered begins, gradually or suddenly, to make you feel like the opposite. You cannot quite identify when it started because it was not a dramatic announcement, but a slow accumulation of small moments, a critical remark here, a dismissive tone there, a comparison that does not favor you, a withdrawal of the warmth and attention that had previously been so abundant. This is the devaluation phase, and it follows the idealization phase in a predictable pattern in relationships with narcissistic or otherwise manipulative individuals. The function of devaluation is multifaceted. It keeps you psychologically off balance, which makes you easier to control than someone who is confident and settled. A person who is perpetually wondering what they did wrong, perpetually trying to restore the positive regard that was once so present, is a person who is inward focused on managing the relationship rather than outward focused on evaluating it. Devaluation also serves to lower your self-worth to a point where leaving the relationship feels less possible. If you have come to believe, through the accumulated weight of criticism and dismissal, that you are less than you thought you were, the world outside the relationship looks less welcoming. The devaluation has shrunk your sense of what you deserve and what is possible. The cruelty of this phase is that it is measured against the idealization that preceded it. You are not simply being treated poorly in a vacuum. You are being treated poorly after being treated extraordinarily well, which means every bad moment is measured against every good one, and the effort to return to the good ones keeps you in the relationship long after the bad ones alone would have driven you away. Flying monkeys. In The Wizard of Oz, the Wicked Witch does not confront Dorothy directly in every instance. She sends her flying monkeys to do her work. This image captures, with remarkable precision, a dynamic that plays out in real relationships and social systems. A manipulative individual who wants to maintain pressure on someone, gather information, or enforce compliance without always being visibly present uses other people to accomplish these goals. These other people, who may or may not understand their role in what is happening, are called flying monkeys. They may be friends, family members, colleagues, mutual acquaintances, or new contacts the manipulator has cultivated specifically for this purpose. They carry messages, apply pressure, relay information back to the central manipulator, and reinforce the narrative the manipulator has constructed. Many flying monkeys are not consciously malicious. They genuinely believe the version of events they have been given and are acting from a sincere place of concern or loyalty. But because the information they are operating from has been curated by the manipulator, their sincere actions serve the manipulator's agenda rather than any objective reality. They may reach out to ask how you are doing in ways that feel caring, but are actually information gathering. They may deliver the message that the manipulator just wants to talk, and that you are being unreasonable for maintaining distance. They may share the version of events the manipulator constructed in ways that create social pressure and reputational cost for the person who is protecting themselves. Understanding flying monkeys means recognizing that the people approaching you may not be the true origin of the pressure being applied, and that the most important boundary is often with the person who sent them rather than the people they sent. Hoovering pull. When a person with manipulative tendencies loses control over someone, when their target begins to establish distance, exercise independence, or prepare to leave, many will deploy a specific set of behaviors designed to pull that person back into the dynamic before the exit is complete. This is called hoovering, after the vacuum cleaner brand, because of how powerfully it sucks the departing person back in. Hoovering can take many forms depending on what the manipulator has learned about their target. For some, it arrives as the grand romantic gesture, declarations of love, promises of change, the production of the exact future that was dangled and withdrawn so many times before. For others, it arrives as crisis, a sudden health emergency, a financial collapse, a catastrophic emotional breakdown that requires immediate intervention and makes leaving feel like abandonment of someone in genuine need. For others, it is nostalgia, a carefully chosen reminder of the best moments shared, a photograph, a song, a reference to an inside joke, delivered at the moment of maximum vulnerability in the exit process. For others, it is guilt, direct statements or heavily implied messages about what your leaving is doing to them, to others who depend on the relationship, to the shared life you built. What all versions of hoovering have in common is that they are deployed not because the manipulator has genuinely changed or because the relationship has genuinely transformed into something different, but because the loss of control produces a specific kind of urgency that drives behavior aimed at restoration of that control. The feelings expressed may be real, but feelings and changed behavior are not the same thing, and the test of any genuine change is behavior sustained across time, not declarations produced in the moment of potential loss. Cognitive overload. The human mind has a finite capacity for processing information at any given moment. When that capacity is exceeded, decision-making quality deteriorates significantly. Choices that would have been carefully evaluated are made on the basis of simplification, habit, or whatever option requires the least additional cognitive effort. This limitation is well understood by those who design environments intended to produce specific decisions in people who might choose differently with more time and clarity. Cognitive overload as a deliberate technique involves flooding a person with more information, demands, considerations, or options than they can comfortably process, with the specific goal of degrading the quality of their decision-making and making them more likely to comply with whatever is being offered as the simple or default choice. In sales environments, this can look like the deliberate introduction of complexity around all options except the preferred one. In political or media environments, it looks like an information environment so dense and so fast-moving that critical evaluation of any individual claim becomes practically impossible. In personal relationships, it can look like a partner who escalates conflicts to such complexity and such intensity that the exhausted person simply agrees in order to end the overwhelm. Protecting cognitive capacity in high-stakes decisions involves recognizing when complexity is being imposed rather than genuinely present, creating space and time away from the source of overload before making decisions, and being deeply skeptical of any situation in which the complexity conveniently points toward a conclusion that benefits someone else. Conditional love, love that is contingent on your performance, compliance, or adherence to someone else's requirements, is not love in any functional sense. It is a control system that uses the language and appearance of love as its mechanism. Conditional love communicates, through consistent demonstration if not always through words, that the warmth, approval, connection, and care being offered can be withdrawn if you fail to meet the conditions being set. The conditions themselves may be stated explicitly, or they may be entirely implicit, communicated only through the pattern of when warmth is given and when it is withheld. What makes conditional love so psychologically damaging, particularly when it is experienced in childhood but also in adult relationships, is that it turns the self-development project entirely outward. Rather than developing from the inside, from your own values, curiosity, and natural growth, you develop reactively, always scanning for what the condition setter requires, always adjusting your presentation and your behavior to maintain the supply of conditional approval. This produces people who are extraordinarily attuned to others' needs and feelings and extraordinarily disconnected from their own. They have learned that their own inner states are less important than the management of the person who holds the supply of love they need. In adult relationships, conditional love often presents as support and care that are reliably present when you are agreeable and reliably absent when you are not, including when not being agreeable, simply means having needs, opinions, or feelings that differ from the other person's. Recognizing the conditionality in a relationship involves noticing what changes when you express disagreement, maintain a boundary, or prioritize your own needs, and whether the shift in treatment matches the response of someone who loves you. Divide and conquer. Groups are stronger than individuals. Networks of people with shared interests, shared information, and mutual support are far more resistant to manipulation, control, or exploitation than isolated individuals. This is why one of the most reliable strategies for a person or institution seeking to maintain disproportionate control over a group of people is to prevent those people from forming coalitions, sharing information, and coordinating with each other. Divide and conquer is the deliberate introduction of conflict, suspicion, or competition between people who might otherwise cooperate to their mutual benefit and to the cost of whoever is manipulating them. In family systems, this can look like a parent who shares different information with different family members, creates the impression that family members have said negative things about each other when they have not, and positions themselves as the only reliable authority on what is actually true. In workplace environments, it can look like a management style that creates competition rather than collaboration between colleagues, shares performance information selectively to generate resentment, and prevents lateral communication between team members. In social and political contexts, divide and conquer is one of the oldest and most reliable techniques of control, used to prevent communities with shared material interests from recognizing those interests and acting on them. The prevention of solidarity is the goal. When you find yourself in conflict with someone who is in a structurally similar position to you, it is always worth asking whose interests are served by the conflict and whether there is a third party who benefits from your mutual opposition. Anchoring effect, the first number you hear in a negotiation, the first price on a menu, the first claim made in a debate, all of these establish what is called an anchor. The anchor is an initial piece of information that exerts a disproportionate influence on all subsequent evaluations, even when the anchor itself is arbitrary or strategically exaggerated. The human tendency to adjust from an anchor rather than evaluating absolutely means that whoever controls the first number in any negotiation has a structural advantage that no amount of rational subsequent analysis fully overcomes. In commercial contexts, this is why luxury items are placed at the beginning of a product line. Every subsequent item seems more affordable by comparison, even if the comparison item was priced specifically to create that contrast. It is why original prices are displayed alongside sale prices, so that the original price, whether it was ever genuinely charged or not, establishes the reference from which the sale price looks like a bargain. In interpersonal contexts, anchoring is used in arguments where the first person to make an extreme claim forces the other to negotiate from that extreme rather than from a neutral starting point. It is used in first impressions, where an initial characterization of a person, situation, or event colors all subsequent interpretation of information about it. Protecting against anchoring requires recognizing when an anchor has been set and deliberately working to generate your own independent assessment of the value or truth of something before the anchor is allowed to fully establish itself. Strategic silence. Words are not the only instruments of control in a conversation. The deliberate withholding of information, response, or acknowledgement can be as precisely targeted and as effective as anything spoken. Strategic silence as a manipulation technique is different from the silent treatment described earlier in that its purpose is not necessarily punishment. Its purpose is information management, mystery cultivation, or the creation of a gap in understanding that the other person rushes to fill with their own assumptions, which the silent party can then shape. When a person goes deliberately silent in response to a direct question, they force the other person into the position of supplying the answer, and people almost always supply answers that are colored by their greatest fear or their deepest hope. The silence becomes a canvas on which you paint your own anxiety or desire. The silent party then has the option of confirming, denying, or simply allowing the other person to remain in the uncertainty, which gives them ongoing leverage. Strategic silence is also used to avoid accountability. A person who does not respond to a legitimate concern has not addressed it, but if the silence continues long enough, the topic often simply expires from the conversation without resolution. The burden of forcing a response typically falls on the person who raised the concern, and the energy required to sustain that pressure is usually greater than the energy required to simply maintain silence. The net result is that silence wins and the concern goes unaddressed, not through any explicit refusal, but through the simple fact that the other person eventually stops pressing. Shame induction. Shame is not the same as guilt. Guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am something bad. Guilt is about behavior and, when it functions healthfully, produces the motivation to repair and do differently. Shame is about identity and, when it is induced by another person as a control tool, produces paralysis, self-concealment, and deep psychological damage. A person who has successfully been made to feel shame about who they are, rather than what they did, is far easier to manage than a person who has healthy self-regard. This is why shame induction is one of the most powerful and most devastatingly effective psychological manipulation tools available. Shame can be induced through direct statement, through contempt, through public comparison, through the strategic withdrawal of dignity, or through the slow accumulation of messages delivered subtly over time that communicate that you are too much, not enough, fundamentally flawed, or perpetually disappointing. Unlike guilt-inducing criticism, which at least gives you something to change, shame induction offers no path forward because it targets who you are rather than what you do. If the problem is you at your core, there is no adjustment sufficient to fix it. This produces a person who is in a perpetual state of effort to become acceptable without any reliable feedback that acceptable is achievable. The manipulation value of this is that the person so positioned can always be moved through the implication that this might finally be the time they become good enough, if only they comply with whatever is being requested of them. Learned helplessness. In a series of experiments conducted in the 1960s, psychologist Martin Seligman placed dogs in conditions where electric shocks occurred regardless of any action the dog took to prevent them. After repeated exposure to this unavoidable unpleasantness, the dogs were placed in conditions where escape was actually possible, but they did not attempt to escape. They had learned that their actions had no effect on the outcomes they experienced, and that learning transferred to new situations where action could have actually worked. This is learned helplessness, and it is one of the most psychologically significant concepts in understanding how manipulative environments damage people's capacity to act in their own interest. Human beings who have been placed in repeated situations where their actions, efforts, or appeals for change produce no reliable result develop the same generalized expectation of ineffectiveness. Over time, they stop trying, not because they are passive by nature, but because their experience has taught them that trying does not work. This is not weakness. It is rational adaptation to irrational conditions. Manipulators create conditions for learned helplessness by ensuring that whatever you try is never quite right, that the rules change frequently enough that no adaptation is permanently successful, and that effort is met with indifference or additional demand rather than any form of acknowledgement. The exit from learned helplessness begins with the recognition that the environment that produced it is not representative of all environments, and that the ineffectiveness of your efforts in that context was a product of the design of that context, not of your own inherent inability. Social proof manipulation. Human beings are fundamentally social creatures, and one of the most reliable decision-making shortcuts we use is looking to others to determine what is correct, appropriate, or valuable. When we are uncertain, we observe what most people do and follow that behavior. When we are unsure whether a belief is accurate, we ask what most people believe. This tendency, called social proof, is generally adaptive. A behavior endorsed by many people is often, though not always, a safer choice than a behavior endorsed by very few. But the mechanism is easily manufactured. When the evidence of social consensus is fabricated, implied without basis, or created through manipulation of perception, the social proof reflex directs people toward conclusions or behaviors that do not actually reflect genuine consensus at all. In commercial contexts, fake reviews, inflated follower counts, manufactured testimonials, and strategic deployment of phrases like "everyone is doing this" serve this purpose. In political and social contexts, the perception of majorities who hold specific views, whether or not those majorities exist, moves individuals toward those views through the social proof mechanism. In interpersonal manipulation, triangulation, and flying monkey tactics, both leverage social proof, creating the impression that multiple independent parties agree with the manipulator's perspective. The defense against social proof manipulation involves distinguishing between genuine independent agreement among people who have access to the same information and apparent consensus that has been manufactured, curated, or implied. Numbers matter much less when the numbers have been selected or created by the party seeking to influence you. False dichotomy. Reality is almost always more complex than two options. But binary framing is a manipulation technique that reduces this complexity to a forced choice between two alternatives, at least one of which serves the interests of the person presenting the frame. The false dichotomy, sometimes called the false dilemma, is one of the most common and most effective rhetorical tools available because the binary structure it imposes feels logical and complete, even when the actual option space is far broader. You are either with us or against us. You either support this or you support the alternative we have named. You either make this choice or something terrible happens. In each case, the framing suggests that only two options exist when in reality there may be many. The presentation of a binary forces the target to evaluate within the frame rather than questioning the frame itself. If the two options presented are both acceptable to the person presenting them, or if only one is clearly unacceptable, the binary structure makes the preferred option seem like the obvious choice. Critical evaluation of any situation begins with asking whether the options presented are actually the only ones available, who chose to frame the situation in this particular way, and what other possibilities exist outside the binary that was constructed for you. Reframing reality. The same event can be described in ways that produce entirely different emotional and evaluative responses depending on the language, emphasis, and context used to describe it. Reframing is the technique of shifting the interpretive lens through which an event, behavior, or situation is understood, and it is used by manipulators to make their own unacceptable behavior seem reasonable, and the legitimate responses of others seem unreasonable. A person who raises a concern is reframed as attacking. A person who maintains a boundary is reframed as controlling. A person who expresses hurt is reframed as manipulative. A person who asks for accountability is reframed as punishing. Each reframe inverts the moral and relational meaning of the original action, replacing what actually happened with a version that relocates responsibility and sympathetic positioning. Reframing is powerful because it does not require the other person to accept the reframe. It merely requires that the reframe be introduced with enough conviction and persistence to create doubt. Once doubt is introduced about the meaning of your own behavior, you are already inside the manipulator's interpretive framework. The most reliable defense against systematic reframing is a clear and stable internal understanding of your own intentions and their own actions. When someone tells you that what you actually did was different from what you know you did, the question is not whether their version is more convincing. The question is what you actually experienced, intended, and observed. Manufactured debt creates leverage. When one person believes they owe another person something significant, their choices and behaviors are shaped around that felt obligation in ways that serve the creditor more than the debtor. Manufactured debt is the technique of creating an inflated or entirely false sense of obligation in another person by consistently overstating the value of what you have given, understating the value of what they have given, and framing the relationship as one in which they are perpetually receiving more than they are providing. This technique is particularly effective in relationships where genuine giving has taken place, because the existence of real acts of generosity or support provides a foundation onto which an exaggerated and manipulative accounting can be built. A parent who provided genuinely good support in childhood can leverage that genuine giving indefinitely by framing all subsequent interaction in terms of what is still owed for what was given. A partner who supported you through a difficult period can transform that genuine support into an ongoing debt that is never quite repaid and never quite forgiven. The manufactured quality of the debt lies not necessarily in the unreality of what was given, but in the refusal to acknowledge what was given in return, the interest rate applied to the original giving, and the way the debt is invoked specifically at moments when it serves the creditor's purposes rather than as a genuine accounting of the relationship. Intellectual undermining. Confidence in your own thinking is one of the most important psychological resources you have. A person who trusts their own reasoning process is far more capable of independent decision-making, of recognizing manipulation, and of maintaining a stable sense of self than a person who has been made to doubt the reliability of their own mind. This is why certain manipulators specifically target intellectual confidence. By consistently calling your reasoning into question, finding flaws in your logic, suggesting that your conclusions reflect your limitations rather than the evidence available, and positioning themselves as more intelligent, more informed, or more capable of clear thinking, they can create a dynamic where you defer to their conclusions even when your own reasoning tells you something different. This is not the same as healthy debate or genuine disagreement. Healthy challenge to your thinking improves it and leaves you more confident in the conclusions you reach through that challenge. Intellectual undermining leaves you less confident in your thinking regardless of whether your thinking was accurate, and does so through a pattern of strategic invalidation rather than genuine engagement with the content of your reasoning. The effects of sustained intellectual undermining extend beyond the relationship in which it occurs. People who have been systematically made to doubt their own thinking often carry that self-doubt into new relationships and new contexts, continuing to defer to others in ways that serve no one's genuine interests. Hot-cold behavior. There is a relational pattern that produces a very specific kind of psychological instability in people who experience it. One day, the person is warm, present, engaged, and affectionate. The next day, without any discernible cause, they are cold, distant, and barely present. There has been no obvious conflict, no clear explanation, no offered reason for the shift. And you, the person on the receiving end, spend an enormous amount of mental and emotional energy trying to understand what happened and what you need to do to restore the warmth. This hot and cold cycling is a form of emotional instability that, whether or not it is deliberately deployed, functions as a manipulation mechanism because of how profoundly it disrupts the other person's psychological equilibrium and redirects their focus toward managing the relationship rather than evaluating it. When someone's warmth toward you is reliably contingent on nothing you can clearly identify, you become hypervigilant. You monitor their mood constantly. You adjust your behavior continuously without a stable reference point. You stop attending to your own feelings and needs because all of your attention is consumed by the work of reading and responding to theirs. This hypervigilant state is both exhausting and deeply disorienting to a sense of self. People who have lived in close proximity to hot and cold cycling often report a difficulty, even after leaving, in accessing their own feelings and preferences clearly, because for so long their internal life was entirely subordinated to monitoring external conditions. Fear, uncertainty, doubt, abbreviated as FUD. This technique is one of the most widely used instruments of psychological influence in both commercial and political environments, and its applications in interpersonal manipulation are equally significant. The strategy does not require providing false information, though it often does. It requires only introducing enough doubt, concern, or anxiety about the alternatives to a preferred choice or position that the person being influenced becomes reluctant to pursue those alternatives. Rather than making the case for a specific option on the merits of that option, FUD works by contaminating the emotional and evaluative landscape around competing options. Rumors, questions, implications of risk, worst-case scenarios presented as likely outcomes, and generalized warnings about the dangers of moving in a particular direction all serve the purpose of making any path other than the one the influencer prefers feel uncertain and dangerous. In interpersonal relationships, this looks like the consistent introduction of doubt about anyone or anything that might serve as an alternative to the relationship with the manipulator. Your friends may not be as supportive as they seem. The job you are thinking of leaving for might not work out the way you hope. The decision you are considering has risks that you may not have fully considered. None of these need to be outright lies to be effective. The introduction of generalized concern is enough to slow, distort, or prevent decision-making that would otherwise move you away from the influence the FUD was designed to protect. Backhanded compliment. There is a particular form of social delivery that accomplishes two contradictory things simultaneously. It compliments and it diminishes. It appears to praise while actually undermining. It is delivered with the plausible deniability of seeming generous, so that any objection you raise to how it landed can be dismissed as oversensitivity to something that was intended as a compliment. This is the backhanded compliment, and it is one of the most socially elegant tools of psychological undermining because it is almost impossible to address without appearing to confirm the framing the undermine was designed to create. Common examples include comments that praise an outcome while drawing attention to the surprise that you achieved it, compliments that embed a comparison unfavorable to you, and statements that acknowledge something you did while framing it in a context that minimizes its value. You are so much better than I expected. You look amazing for your age. That was actually really impressive. The word actually does enormous work in backhanded compliments because it carries the implication that the performance exceeded a low baseline expectation. The psychological effect of consistent backhanded compliments, particularly from someone whose opinion matters to you, is a subtle but pervasive erosion of confidence. Because each individual instance can be rationalized as clumsiness rather than malice, the pattern is difficult to confront. But the cumulative effect is the same regardless of whether the intent is conscious. Double bind trap. A double bind is a communicative situation in which two messages are delivered simultaneously, each of which contradicts the other, and in which the person receiving them cannot comply with both, cannot ignore either, and cannot exit the situation without cost. It was first formally described by Gregory Bateson in the context of communication patterns in families with schizophrenic members, where the double bind was identified as a particularly damaging communication structure. But double binds are used broadly, in relationships, workplaces, and institutions, as tools of control that make genuine compliance impossible while making non-compliance punishable. A simple example is the communicative pattern in which someone is simultaneously told to be more independent and punished each time they exercise independence, or told to communicate more openly while being criticized or dismissed each time they attempt genuine communication. In each case, the person receiving the messages cannot win regardless of which injunction they follow, because following one violates the other. This creates a profound sense of trapped ineffectiveness. No matter what you do, it is wrong. The double bind maintains control by ensuring that every choice the target makes can be used against them, because the contradictory requirements guarantee that at least one requirement is always being violated. Escape from the double bind requires stepping outside the frame entirely, naming the contradiction rather than trying to navigate within it, and refusing the premise that both injunctions must be obeyed. Plausible deniability, one of the most sophisticated elements of skilled manipulation, is the construction of behavior that achieves its intended psychological effect while remaining impossible to clearly and publicly attribute to intent. Plausible deniability is the deliberate maintenance of ambiguity around the meaning of one's own behavior, so that when that behavior is named or challenged, an alternative, innocent interpretation is always available. Tone is one of the primary vehicles for this. The same words delivered with contemptuous tone have a completely different psychological effect from those words delivered neutrally. But tone is not captured in a transcript. When you report to others that you were made to feel diminished, and the other person describes what they said with the alternative tone, your experience becomes your interpretation, and their content becomes the evidence. The technique is also executed through omission, through technically true statements that carry misleading implications, through jokes that deliver serious psychological blows and retreat behind the comedy as cover, and through the deployment of just enough ambiguity in any action that intent can always be contested. What plausible deniability accomplishes beyond individual interactions is the creation of an environment in which the person doing the manipulation is very difficult to identify as doing so, while the person being manipulated appears, to themselves and to observers, to be responding to things that are ambiguous at best and imaginary at worst. The social isolation this creates, where you cannot explain clearly what is happening to you in ways that are easy for others to understand, is itself part of the control mechanism. Identity attacking? The most disorienting attacks are not on what you have done, but on who you are. Behavioral criticism, however harsh, at least implies a stable self that is capable of doing differently. Identity attacks, by contrast, target the self itself, suggesting that who you are at your core is the problem. These attacks are destabilizing in a particular way because there is nowhere to go with them. You cannot simply change who you are in the way you might change a behavior, and the person making the attack knows this. Identity attacks in close relationships typically target the things about you that you value most in yourself, or the things you are most insecure about. Your intelligence, your values, your emotional responses, your basic competence as a parent, partner, professional, or person. The most effective identity attacks are delivered not as accusations, but as observations. They arrive in the language of concerned disclosure rather than hostile criticism. I just worry that you have a problem with, or I think you need to acknowledge that you tend to, or people who know you well can see that you. This framing positions the attack as coming from a place of care and insight rather than aggression, which makes it harder to defend against and more likely to be internalized. The cumulative effect of sustained identity attacks is a fundamental erosion of self-trust. When you no longer trust your own perceptions, judgment, values, or emotional responses, you become dependent on external sources for your sense of what is real and what is right, and the person who has been providing the attacks becomes the primary available source. Strategic flattery. Flattery and genuine appreciation look identical from the outside and feel nearly identical from the inside, but they serve entirely different functions. Genuine appreciation is offered freely, with no agenda, and does not change based on whether you comply with whatever the appreciating person wants from you. Strategic flattery is timed, targeted, and conditional, deployed specifically to lower defenses, increase receptivity, and produce the particular state in you that makes it easiest to secure your compliance with whatever comes next. The timing of strategic flattery is its primary distinguishing feature. It tends to arrive just before a request, just after a period of coldness or conflict as a rewarming mechanism, or specifically when you are on the verge of clarity that would not serve the flatterer's purposes. It also tends to be calibrated to your specific psychology. Someone who is insecure about their intelligence will receive flattery about their intelligence. Someone who doubts their judgment will receive confirmation of their extraordinary judgment. Someone who needs to feel special will receive communication that positions them as uniquely exceptional. What strategic flattery exploits is not vanity, though it can use vanity as its entry point. It exploits the genuine human need for affirmation and recognition. That need is real and universal, and meeting it, even falsely, creates a warm response in the person receiving it that makes critical evaluation more difficult. A useful awareness practice is to notice the consistent relationship between compliments and requests, and to ask whether the appreciation you receive is correlated with your compliance or is genuinely independent of it. Boundary testing. Boundaries are not tested once and then respected or violated. They are tested repeatedly, in increments, by people who understand that the outer limits of what someone will accept are discovered not through direct confrontation, but through gradual pressure applied over time. Boundary testing is the systematic process of identifying and expanding what you are willing to tolerate, using the information gathered from each test to calibrate the next push. The initial tests are small, almost invisible. A comment that is slightly more critical than appropriate. A request that is slightly beyond what was agreed. A behavior that is slightly past what is comfortable. Your response to each test is recorded and processed. If you say nothing, the next push is slightly larger. If you object, but then let it go, the objection is factored into the next approach without changing the trajectory. If you enforce a consequence, the pressure may temporarily retreat before returning from a different angle. What this process accomplishes over time is the steady displacement of your actual limits. What felt completely unacceptable at the beginning of a relationship becomes something you have accommodated for long enough that challenging it now seems disproportionate. You are not the same person who would have refused this at the start. You have been incrementally trained into acceptance. Recognizing boundary testing requires watching for patterns rather than individual incidents. A single transgression may be genuine carelessness. A series of similar transgressions, each slightly past the previous one, is a systematic process of limit expansion. Memory revision. Memory is far less reliable than most people believe. Research has consistently demonstrated that memory is reconstructive rather than reproductive, meaning that we do not retrieve stored recordings of past events, but instead rebuild memories from available fragments each time we access them. This rebuilding process is influenced by our current state, our subsequent experiences, and the information we have encountered since the original event. This flexibility in human memory is exploited by manipulators who understand that introducing alternative versions of past events with enough confidence and enough repetition can genuinely alter what someone remembers as having happened. Memory revision as a manipulation technique involves replacing or distorting the target's recollection of specific events, primarily events in which the manipulator's behavior was problematic. You said you were fine with it. That never happened the way you are describing it. I told you about that months ago and you agreed. The version being offered competes with your own recollection, and because memory is genuinely fallible, the self-doubt this produces can be real. If the revision is delivered with confidence and the relationship is one where you have generally deferred to the other person, the revision can take hold. Memory revision differs from gaslighting primarily in focus. Gaslighting broadly attacks your perception of reality. Memory revision is more specifically targeted at the historical record of what occurred between you and the person doing the revising. Loss aversion trigger. Behavioral economists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky demonstrated that the pain of losing something is psychologically approximately twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining something of equivalent value. This asymmetry between loss and gain in emotional experience is called loss aversion, and it is one of the most consistently exploited features of human psychology by anyone seeking to influence decisions. Framing a decision in terms of what will be lost if you do not comply produces far more motivational force than framing the same decision in terms of what will be gained if you do. Messages that emphasize potential loss activate a different and more powerful emotional circuit than messages that emphasize potential gain, and the choices made under loss aversion are often different from the choices that would be made under gain framing, even when the objective outcomes are identical. In manipulative relationships, loss aversion is triggered by any communication that emphasizes what you stand to lose by exercising independence, making a different choice, or maintaining a limit, the relationship you will lose, the status you will forfeit, the opportunities that will not be available to you, the person you will hurt, the version of yourself you will no longer be able to sustain. Because you feel losses more strongly than gains, these messages produce more compliance than equivalent messages focused on what you might gain from the alternative. Recognizing loss aversion as it is being triggered requires deliberately translating the loss-framed message into its gain-framed equivalent and evaluating both versions before making any decision. Crocodile tears. Genuine emotional expression serves the function of communication. It conveys information about a person's internal state and invites connection, understanding, or appropriate response from others. But emotional expression can also be performed, not because the internal state being expressed is absent, but because the expression is deployed strategically rather than spontaneously, timed and calibrated to produce a specific response rather than to genuinely communicate. Crocodile tears refer specifically to the performance of distress, sadness, or suffering in situations where the person performing it is not experiencing the emotion they are displaying, or where the degree of display is significantly in excess of the degree of actual feeling, in order to manipulate the response of the observer. This technique is particularly effective because the social pressure to respond compassionately to visible distress is very strong. A person who does not respond sympathetically to someone who appears to be crying risks appearing cold, cruel, or indifferent. The performer knows this and uses the social cost of non-response as leverage. Context matters enormously in distinguishing genuine distress from performed distress. The questions to ask include whether the distress is proportionate to the situation, whether it appears reliably at moments of potential accountability or loss of control, whether it serves a clear function in redirecting the conversation or producing a specific response, and whether it resolves quickly once that function has been achieved. Spiritual bypassing. In communities that value spiritual or philosophical frameworks, those frameworks can themselves become tools of manipulation. Spiritual bypassing is the use of spiritual or philosophical language, practice, or concepts to avoid accountability, dismiss the legitimate needs and concerns of others, or position ordinary manipulative behavior as the expression of higher understanding. The person who responds to a legitimate complaint about their behavior by talking about forgiveness, letting go of attachment, or the importance of focusing on positive energy rather than addressing the actual complaint is engaging in spiritual bypassing. The spiritual language is functioning as a shield against accountability rather than as a genuine expression of the philosophy being invoked. In this context, the manipulator uses the language of high-mindedness to occupy the moral high ground while avoiding the ordinary human work of accountability. They may describe your concern as evidence of your lack of development, your attachment to ego, your resistance to growth, or your inability to see the larger picture. They position themselves as further along a spiritual path that places them above ordinary interpersonal accountability. The particular cruelty of this technique is that it inverts the relationship between spiritual practice and human decency. Genuine spiritual depth in most traditions is expressed in greater compassion, greater accountability, and greater care for others, not in using philosophical concepts as armor against being held responsible for one's behavior. Push-pull dynamic. One of the most destabilizing patterns in intimate relationships is one in which closeness is alternated with distance in a rhythm that keeps the other person in a perpetual state of uncertainty about where they stand. The push-pull dynamic involves cycling between pursuit and withdrawal, warmth and coldness, expressed desire and apparent disinterest, in a pattern that feels chaotic to the person on the receiving end, but may be quite deliberate in its effects. When the manipulator is distant or cold, the other person pursues, invests more, and tries harder. This pursuit is reinforcing for the person creating the distance because it confirms their desirability and their control over the relationship's emotional temperature. When the other person begins to pull back, either from exhaustion or protective instinct, the manipulator often returns with warmth, engagement, and apparent desire. This renewed pursuit re-engages the other person's hope and draws them back into active investment. The cycle then repeats. What this pattern produces in the person experiencing it is an emotional roller coaster that is simultaneously exhausting and addictive. The highs of the warm phases are intensified by the lows of the cold phases, and the attachment formed in this cyclical environment has the hallmarks of trauma bonding. The person caught in the cycle often describes feeling confused, unsettled, and unable to either fully commit or fully leave, which is precisely the psychological state that serves the person controlling the cycle. False consensus effect. There is a widespread human tendency to overestimate the degree to which other people share our own views, preferences, and behaviors. This is called the false consensus effect, and it is a naturally occurring cognitive bias. But it is also deliberately exploited by manipulators who understand that the belief in widespread consensus for their position makes that position far more persuasive than it would be if accurately presented as a minority view. The manufactured version of this effect involves communicating about your own position or preferences in ways that imply, without necessarily claiming, that most people share them. Phrases like "everyone knows that," "any reasonable person would agree," or "I think you will find that most people see it this way," create the impression of a consensus that may not exist. The social pressure of apparent consensus is then used to make the dissenting view seem isolated, unreasonable, or out of touch. In group dynamics, the manipulation is more sophisticated. An individual or small coalition creates the impression within a group that a certain view is more widely shared than it actually is, using that manufactured consensus to silence dissent and move group opinion toward the minority position without direct confrontation. People who believe they are alone in their view experience social pressure to conform. The manufactured consensus exploits this pressure by creating an illusion of isolation in those whose views the manipulator wishes to suppress. Selective memory. In any relationship of sufficient duration, there is a shared history, a record of what happened, what was said, what was promised, and what was experienced together. That shared history serves as a reference point for evaluating the present and for navigating disagreements about what is fair or accurate. Selective memory is the manipulation of that shared history through the consistent and convenient forgetting of events that would support your position and the clear and detailed recollection of events that support theirs. It is not the same as ordinary forgetting because the selectivity is directional. What is forgotten always happens to disadvantage you and advantage them. The kindnesses you showed are not remembered. The promises they made are not remembered. The agreements that were reached are not remembered. The accommodations you made are not remembered. Meanwhile, what you said in a moment of frustration is remembered with precision. The one time you were late is cited as a pattern. The position you took that made their argument easier is remembered as a commitment. Selective memory is difficult to counteract because you cannot force someone to remember something, but its pattern can be documented. Keeping a record of agreements, conversations, and significant events in writing, not out of distrust but as a practical tool for shared reference, makes selective memory less effective as a manipulation technique. Public humiliation, power dynamics in relationships and groups are frequently maintained not through direct confrontation, but through the management of status and dignity. Public humiliation is one of the most effective status management tools available because it operates in the presence of witnesses, creating not just a one-time experience for the target, but a social record that affects how others perceive them and how they perceive themselves in relation to the group. The content of the humiliation matters less than its audience. A criticism, a joke at someone's expense, a dismissal, or a revelation of something embarrassing, when delivered privately, can be contained and addressed. When delivered publicly, it produces a fundamentally different experience because it involves the observation and response of others. The humiliated person must now manage not just their own internal response to what happened, but their public presentation in the immediate aftermath, often while still processing the emotional impact of the humiliation itself. Manipulators who use public humiliation understand that the witnesses serve multiple functions. They amplify the impact of the humiliation by multiplying the experience of exposure. They create social pressure to manage the fallout, which often overrides the target's ability to respond clearly or assertively. And they serve as an audience for the manipulator's performance of superiority, which reinforces the manipulator's status in the group while diminishing the target's. The memory of a public humiliation and the anticipatory dread of future ones can be enough to produce significant compliance in someone who might otherwise resist private pressure. Cognitive dissonance exploit. Cognitive dissonance is the psychological discomfort produced when a person holds two contradictory beliefs, or when their behavior contradicts their self-image or their stated values. The mind is strongly motivated to resolve this discomfort, and the resolution most commonly takes the form not of changing the behavior, but of adjusting the belief or adding a new belief that makes the behavior seem more consistent with the overall self-concept. Manipulators exploit this natural drive toward consistency by creating situations in which small compromises are leveraged into larger ones. Once you have behaved in a way that contradicts your values or your stated position, the drive to reduce dissonance makes you more likely to either repeat the behavior or adjust your beliefs in the direction of the behavior. If you can be induced to act against your stated values even once, through social pressure, gradual escalation, or manufactured circumstances, the dissonance between that action and your self-image will motivate rationalizations that bring your self-image closer to the action rather than the reverse. The person who induced the first compromise has created a powerful psychological trajectory toward further compromise. Additionally, cognitive dissonance produces the counterintuitive phenomenon in which the effort invested in something makes it more valued rather than less. The more sacrifice, difficulty, or effort you have invested in a relationship, belief system, or organization, the more your mind needs to justify that investment by finding it valuable. Manipulative systems exploit this by demanding high investment precisely because high investment increases the psychological commitment that makes leaving cognitively costly. Hero narrative trap. There is a particular dynamic in which one person positions themselves as the rescuer of another, and in doing so creates a relationship structure that depends on the continued vulnerability of the person being rescued. The heroic narrative gives the rescuer identity, purpose, status, and a moral framework that justifies the degree of involvement and control they exercise in the other person's life. The problem is that a hero needs a person in distress, which means that the distress of the other person serves the hero's psychological needs, even if the hero is not consciously aware of this dynamic. In relationships built around this structure, the supposed rescuer may actually resist the genuine recovery or independence of the person they are helping, because recovery and independence would dissolve the dynamic that gives the rescuer their purpose. This resistance may be subtle, expressed through the introduction of new threats or challenges every time independence seems near, through the consistent framing of the other person as more fragile than they are, or through the implicit message that they could not manage without this particular person's help and presence. The person being rescued, meanwhile, may experience genuine gratitude and loyalty that makes it very difficult to see the dynamic for what it is. They may feel that questioning the relationship would be a betrayal of the care they have received. Recognizing the hero trap requires asking honestly whether the relationship supports your increasing capacity and independence, or whether it sustains and at times seems to require your ongoing vulnerability. Grandiosity projection. Some manipulative individuals maintain their self-image through a constant production of grandiosity, presenting themselves as exceptional, uniquely talented, specially destined, or operating at a level of understanding that most people cannot access. This grandiosity is not confidence. It is a structural defense against the unbearable experience of ordinary human limitation, and one of the functions of the relationship such individuals cultivate is the support of this grandiose self-image through reflected admiration, agreement, and the extension of special status. People who enter into close relationship with a grandiose individual often find that the relationship is organized around the maintenance of this self-image. Your role, implicitly required and enforced through the full range of manipulation techniques, is to confirm the exceptional quality of the person you are with. Challenges to the grandiose self-image, whether through independent opinion, through outperforming them in some domain, or through simply having needs of your own that redirect attention away from them, are experienced as profound threats and responded to with disproportionate reactions. The grandiosity also functions as a comparative tool. If they are exceptional, ordinary is a diminishment they direct toward others. The subtle or not so subtle communication that you are lucky to be in proximity to someone of their caliber serves simultaneously to elevate them and to lower your sense of your own worth, creating the dependency and gratitude that serves the manipulator's needs. Urgency manufacturing, deliberation, is the enemy of impulsive compliance. When a person is given time to think, to consult others, to research, to reflect on their own needs and values, they are far more likely to make decisions that serve their own interests and far less likely to make decisions that serve someone else's at their expense. This is why manufactured urgency is one of the most reliable tools in the manipulator's and the marketer's arsenal. By creating the impression that a decision must be made immediately, before the optimal conditions for that decision actually exist, the urgency bypasses the deliberative processes that protect good decision-making. The decision deadline may be entirely real or entirely manufactured. The crucial point is that it is presented as imposed by external circumstances beyond either party's control, when in fact the timing is chosen specifically because it does not give you enough space to think clearly. You must decide by tonight. The offer is only available if you commit right now. I need an answer before I talk to anyone else. Each of these creates the same functional effect. Your decision-making is compressed into a window too small for the quality of thought the decision deserves. The most reliable response to manufactured urgency is a deliberate pause. If the decision is genuinely important, the cost of taking an extra day or week to make it well is almost always lower than the cost of making it badly. Any offer or relationship that cannot withstand your need for adequate deliberation time is telling you something important about itself. Dependency creation, control over another person, is most stable, not when it is enforced through fear, but when it is built into the structure of their daily life in ways that make the controller a necessary figure. Dependency creation is the systematic process of making yourself indispensable to another person, not as an expression of genuine care and contribution, but as a means of ensuring that the person cannot function effectively without you, and therefore will not leave or challenge your position. This can be accomplished through many means. Performing certain functions and simultaneously preventing the other person from developing the capacity to perform those functions themselves. Managing information, resources, or relationships in ways that make you the necessary intermediary. Creating crises that only you are positioned to solve. Cultivating a narrative about the other person's limitations and your compensating strength that both parties come to believe. Over time, the dependency may become genuine. The person who was prevented from developing certain skills, who lost certain connections, who became accustomed to having certain things managed for them, may actually be less capable of independent functioning than they were before the dependency was created. This genuine dependency is then presented as evidence that the controller's presence is not control, but necessary support. Recognizing the difference between support that builds capacity and support that erodes it is one of the most important distinctions available in evaluating any close relationship or institutional arrangement. Information extraction. Trust is the precondition for the sharing of vulnerable information. In relationships of genuine trust, the information shared freely and with an open heart deepens the connection and serves the mutual understanding between two people. In relationships where trust is performed rather than real, information shared freely and with an open heart becomes inventory. It is cataloged and stored for potential future use in ways the sharer never intended or anticipated. Information extraction is the technique of cultivating trust through performed warmth, confidentiality, and reciprocal disclosure, specifically for the purpose of gathering information that can later be used for leverage, manipulation, or control. The person doing the extracting is an excellent conversationalist. They listen actively. They ask perceptive questions. They create an atmosphere of safety and being understood that feels genuine because the techniques used to create it are the same ones that genuine connection uses. What is absent is the intent. The information being gathered is not being gathered to understand you better in service of your well-being. It is being gathered as intelligence. Your fears become the specific things that will be threatened. Your shames become the content of public disclosure if you do not comply. Your desires become the carrots used to secure your investment. Your wounds become the target points of the most precision psychological strikes. The realization that your trust was a resource that was mined rather than a connection that was real is one of the most disorienting and painful experiences available in human relationships. Catastrophizing control. Worry has a natural ceiling in healthy psychology. A concern is evaluated, some precaution is taken, and then the mind moves forward. But in environments controlled by someone who uses anxiety as a management tool, worry is actively cultivated and expanded rather than resolved. Catastrophizing control is the technique of consistently framing situations, decisions, and potential actions in their most alarming possible terms in order to produce anxiety that paralyzes independent action and drives compliance with whatever the controller presents as the safe alternative. The catastrophizing is selective. It is specifically applied to options or actions that would reduce the controller's influence. The job you are thinking of taking is presented as a serious risk. The relationship you are developing outside the primary one is framed as dangerous. The decision you are making independently is described as reckless and likely to end badly. Meanwhile, the options that maintain the controller's influence are presented as safe, sensible, and low risk. Over time, the person on the receiving end of consistent catastrophizing develops a generalized anxiety about independent action that has little relationship to the actual risk levels involved in the decisions they are facing. They have been trained to see the world as more dangerous than it is, particularly in the domains where the catastrophizing has been most consistently applied. This manufactured anxiety is then effectively used to keep them within the sphere of influence of the person who cultivated it. Neg technique. In the vocabulary of a particular subculture that studies and systematizes seduction, the neg is a specific technique that involves delivering a minor criticism, a slightly unflattering observation, or a playfully dismissive comment to someone whose interest you want to cultivate. The theoretical basis is that extremely attractive or high-status individuals are accustomed to universal approval and flattery and have developed a boredom response to it. The neg is supposed to stand out from the approval, create interest, and introduce a slight uncertainty about whether the person delivering it is actually impressed. But beyond its specific context of origin, the neg represents a broader psychological principle that is used far more widely. Undermining someone's confidence in a targeted and calibrated way makes them more interested in gaining the approval of the person doing the undermining. It creates a project, the project of proving yourself to someone who has implicitly suggested you might not be quite up to their standard. This project can become deeply engaging precisely because the standard is controlled by the person who introduced the doubt and the approval is therefore always just out of reach. The neg and its broader cousin, calculated criticism, exploit one of the most fundamental human motivations, which is the desire to be valued by someone who has signaled they might not fully value us. It is the psychological equivalent of the pursuit that intermittent reinforcement creates, and it works for the same underlying reasons. Victimhood positioning. Every person experiences genuine difficulty, injustice, and suffering at some point in their life. Victimhood in this sense is simply an accurate description of an experience. But victimhood can also be performed, cultivated, and maintained as a social and relational strategy that produces specific benefits while insulating a person from accountability and consequences. The person who is always the victim of every situation involving them, who has a consistent narrative in which they are the one being wronged by a rotating cast of different persecutors, who can produce a compelling account of suffering from any conflict regardless of their own role in it, may be using victimhood as a positioning strategy rather than accurately describing their experience. The strategic value of victimhood is significant. Victims receive sympathy and support. Victims are harder to hold accountable because accountability of a victim reads as additional victimization. Victims occupy the morally sympathetic position in any conflict, which gives them access to third-party allies who have only the victim's account as their information. And the victim position is self-reinforcing because any challenge to the victim narrative can be incorporated into the narrative as additional evidence of how they are treated. Distinguishing between genuine victimhood and strategic victimhood is one of the most difficult discrimination tasks in social psychology, and it is made harder by the fact that the two can coexist. A person can have genuine suffering in their history and still use the language and positioning of victimhood strategically in present situations. Selective empathy. Empathy is one of the most important social capacities human beings possess. The ability to understand and share the feelings of another is foundational to compassion, to justice, and to genuine connection. But empathy can be performed selectively, extended strategically to some, and withheld calculatingly from others in ways that serve the agenda of the person deploying it rather than reflecting any genuine capacity for emotional resonance. Selective empathy is characteristic of certain personality profiles in which genuine empathy, if it exists at all, is rationed based on whether the person being empathized with is useful, in group, or currently in favor. Outsiders, people who are critical or inconvenient, or people who are in disfavor, receive none of the empathy that favored individuals receive in abundance. This selectivity serves as a powerful tool of group management in cult-like organizations and close-knit social groups. The abundant empathy directed toward in-group members creates intense loyalty and belonging. The complete absence of empathy directed toward those who challenge or leave creates a powerful deterrent to doing so. It is also characteristic of certain manipulative intimate relationships, where empathy is extended generously during the idealization phase and the reconciliation phases, and withdrawn entirely during the devaluation and punishment phases. The cycling of empathy available and empathy withheld functions as part of the intermittent reinforcement that creates and maintains the trauma bond. Question deflection. The most reliable way to avoid answering a question honestly is to redirect the conversation before the question can be resolved. Question deflection is the technique of responding to a direct question with something that appears to be an answer but is actually a pivot, a counter question, or an elaborate detour that returns you to the vicinity of the original subject without actually addressing it. Politicians are famous for this because the technique is so useful in public communication, where the performance of engagement matters more than the content. But it is equally useful in private manipulation, where a person who cannot answer a question honestly without cost to themselves must find a way to not answer it without appearing to refuse. The counter question is one of the most elegant forms of deflection. You ask something direct, and instead of answering, they respond with their own question, usually one that places you in the position of defending something or explaining yourself. Now you are answering a question you did not raise, and the original question has been set aside. The philosophical diversion is another form, where your specific practical question receives a broad thematic response that appears relevant but resolves nothing concrete. And the emotional escalation deflection involves responding to the question with visible distress about being questioned in this way, shifting the conversation from the content of the question to the management of the distress. Noticing that a question has not been answered and returning to it calmly and persistently is the most direct counter to this technique. Guilt weaponizing. Guilt is a morally functional emotion when it operates naturally. It signals that something you did may have caused harm and motivates repair and change behavior. But guilt can also be artificially activated and deliberately amplified by someone who wants to redirect your behavior for their own purposes. When guilt is weaponized, it is not directed at genuine harm you caused, but is instead manufactured and applied to actions or intentions that are actually reasonable, healthy, and self-protective. Having your own needs becomes selfish. Maintaining limits becomes cruelty. Spending time away becomes abandonment. Disagreeing becomes betrayal. The manipulator's emotional reaction to your ordinary and legitimate behavior is presented as evidence that you have done something wrong. The guilt you feel is genuine, even though the accusation generating it is not, because the feeling of guilt does not require actual wrongdoing. It only requires the perception of wrongdoing, and that perception has been carefully constructed and delivered. Weaponized guilt accomplishes several things. It prevents you from acting on your own needs and judgment. It trains you to self-censor behaviors that are actually healthy. It keeps your attention focused on the emotional management of the person deploying the guilt rather than on your own well-being. And it creates a relationship structure in which the manipulator's reactions are treated as more valid evidence of wrongdoing than your own assessment of what you actually did and why. Oversharing invasion. There is a specific technique in early relationship building that looks like vulnerability but functions as a form of manipulation through the creation of false intimacy. Premature and excessive disclosure of personal information, particularly information of a dramatic, painful, or taboo nature, creates in the listener a sensation of closeness, trust, and special status that has not been genuinely earned through time and shared experience. The person who shares very personal things very quickly appears to trust you, which creates pressure to respond with similar trust. They appear to be selecting you as someone worthy of their most private material, which is flattering. The intimacy that results from this exchange feels real, because the conversation it involved was genuinely personal, even if the motivation for it was strategic rather than spontaneous. This manufactured intimacy serves several purposes. It accelerates bonding, creating attachment faster than the natural pace of relationship development would allow. It creates the illusion of a deep knowing between two people who actually know each other very little, and it establishes a reciprocal expectation where your own disclosures, made in response to theirs, become information they now hold. Genuine vulnerability is proportionate to relationship depth and develops across time. It is not deployed in a first or second meeting with the specific effect of producing rapid attachment. The pace of disclosure in a relationship is itself information about the relationship. When it is dramatically faster than feels natural, the pace itself is worth examining. Moving standards. The requirements for being in good standing with a manipulative person or system are not stable. They shift in ways that are difficult to track because they are never fully articulated. What satisfied them yesterday does not satisfy them today. What they said they wanted turns out not to be what they wanted once you have provided it. The behavior they criticized in you yesterday becomes irrelevant today when a new criticism has displaced it. This moving of standards is distinct from the moving of goalposts described earlier, in that it is not primarily about achievement targets, but about the behavioral requirements for basic approval and standing within the relationship. The effect is the same, which is perpetual striving without ever arriving at a stable state of adequacy. In healthy relationships and systems, the standards for basic respect and good standing are clear and relatively stable. You know what is expected, you can work toward it, and reaching it produces a stable, positive outcome. In systems with moving standards, the instability itself is the control mechanism. A person who can never quite figure out what is required of them, who is always slightly uncertain about whether they are doing enough or being enough, is easier to manage than someone who has a clear and settled sense of their own standing. The uncertainty itself creates the anxious effort to please and the dependency on the person who controls the definition of adequacy. Sleep deprivation influence the human capacity for rational judgment, emotional regulation, empathy, and complex decision-making deteriorates significantly under conditions of inadequate sleep. This is not simply tiredness. It is a fundamental impairment of the cognitive and emotional systems on which good judgment depends. Military interrogation manuals and psychological coercion research have documented the use of sleep disruption as a tool for breaking down resistance and producing compliance because the sleep-deprived mind is dramatically more susceptible to suggestion, more emotionally reactive, less able to maintain consistent positions, and more likely to make decisions it would not make under normal conditions. In the context of interpersonal manipulation, sleep deprivation is not always created through the dramatic methods associated with interrogation. It can be maintained simply by engineering a relational or domestic environment in which restful sleep is consistently disrupted. Conflict and emotional crises reliably staged before bed. Anxiety cultivated through the dynamics described elsewhere in this discussion. An environment of tension that prevents the nervous system from settling into the restful state that sleep requires. A relationship or living situation in which rest is not a protected experience is one in which your judgment, your emotional stability, and your resilience to manipulation are all perpetually compromised. Protecting your sleep in difficult circumstances is not simply a matter of personal health. It is a preservation of the very cognitive tools you need to evaluate and navigate the situation you are in. Charm masking. Charm is not a personality trait. It is a skill that can be cultivated and performed independently of the character of the person performing it. This is a distinction that is conceptually easy to understand, but experientially very difficult to maintain, because charm is specifically effective at creating a feeling of knowing and trusting someone that overrides the more cautious evaluation processes you might otherwise apply. People who are highly charming are consistently described by observers and targets alike with words like genuine, trustworthy, special, and real, not because they are necessarily any of these things, but because charm specifically produces these impressions. This is exactly the problem. Charm is the mask that makes everything beneath it invisible. The person who is entertaining, warm, attentive, quick with exactly the right thing to say, who makes everyone they speak to feel like the most interesting person in the room, has typically practiced these skills to a level of performance that does not reveal the effort. And because the experience of being around them is so positive, the ordinary evaluative questions that would slow down trust development do not arise. Charm masking is not limited to its primary target. The manipulator's social charm creates a network of people who genuinely believe in them and will vouch for them and defend them, creating the social buffer that makes later accountability much harder to achieve. The most important counter-awareness is the recognition that the feeling of knowing and trusting someone produced by charm is an experience of your own response to them, not evidence of their character. Normalize and escalate. Most people, if presented at the outset of a relationship with the full picture of what the relationship will eventually become, would never enter it. The gradual movement from normal to abnormal, from acceptable to unacceptable, from healthy to harmful, is made possible by a specific mechanism in which each step is small enough to be accommodated and normalized before the next step is introduced. The process is sometimes compared to the slow boiling of water, in which the temperature rises gradually enough that the change at any single moment is imperceptible and therefore does not trigger the alarm that would be triggered by immediate introduction to the final temperature. What was shocking at the beginning of the relationship becomes familiar, then familiar becomes normal, then normal becomes expected. The escalation takes many forms, including the escalation of criticism, of control over behavior, of isolation, of emotional intensity, of demands, and of what is required to maintain basic standing in the relationship. None of the individual steps seem large enough to justify a dramatic response, but the accumulated distance from the starting point is enormous. Recognizing this pattern often requires doing something deliberate that the normalization process is designed to prevent, which is stepping out of the current moment and comparing current conditions to the conditions that existed at an earlier point in the relationship, or to conditions in other relationships that serve as a reference for what is normal. That comparison is what makes the escalation visible. False intimacy fast, close relationships take time. The kind of genuine knowing of another person that produces deep trust, the kind that is robust enough to be worth the vulnerability it requires, is built through repeated interaction over time, through the observation of someone's behavior across many contexts, through the experience of navigating difficulty together and seeing how they respond. There is no shortcut to this. But there are shortcuts that feel like this, and they are used deliberately by people who need your trust before you would naturally give it if the relationship were allowed to develop at its honest pace. False intimacy fast-tracking involves creating the sensation and emotional experience of deep mutual knowing through techniques that are entirely independent of the time and shared experience that genuine knowing requires. Mirroring, discussed earlier, is one such technique. Premature disclosure is another. Intense shared emotional experiences, whether genuine or manufactured, create bonding. The deployment of exclusivity, the sense that what passes between you is rare and special and not available to others, creates the feeling of a unique bond. All of these can produce genuine feelings of closeness that are real experiences even when they are based on manufactured conditions. The vulnerability of this is that you are being asked to make the decisions and take the risks appropriate to a deep relationship before the depth of the relationship has actually been established. The intimacy you feel is real, but it has not been tested by time, by conflict, by inconsistency, and by the long, ordinary stretches of relationship that reveal character rather than cultivate impression. Comparison, weaponizing. Every human being is vulnerable to the pain of comparative diminishment. Being told, explicitly or implicitly, that someone else is doing better at the things you care about, or that you fall short of a standard embodied by another person, activates a painful combination of shame and competitive motivation that manipulators use with precision. Comparison weaponizing is the deliberate use of comparison with others to produce insecurity, self-doubt, and the anxious motivation to prove yourself or do more, specifically in contexts where what you are being asked to do or prove serves the manipulator's interests rather than your own. The comparison may be explicit, delivered as a direct statement about how someone else handles a similar situation. It may be implicit, constructed from the way a third party is consistently praised for the qualities that you are consistently found to lack. It may be historical, referencing a past version of yourself that was better in some way. In each case, the structural function is the same. A gap is created between where you are and a standard held up before you, and the discomfort of that gap is used to direct your behavior. Comparison weaponizing is most effective when it is targeted at the specific areas of your greatest insecurity because it finds the places where your own internal critic is already active and amplifies what is already there. The target often does not need to be convinced of the unfavorable comparison because some part of them fears it is already true. Promise cycling. There is a specific relationship pattern in which change is perpetually promised, never fully delivered, and then promised again with renewed apparent sincerity. The cycle operates through several distinct phases. First, there is the behavior that causes harm or produces legitimate complaint. Then there is the confrontation or expression of hurt that cannot be entirely suppressed or avoided. Then there is the promise, the acknowledgement that things need to be different, the apparent remorse, the genuine or performed commitment to change. And then there is the change, real enough and sustained enough to reactivate hope and investment. And then there is the return to the original behavior. And then the cycle begins again. What makes promise cycling so effective as a control mechanism is that the change phase produces genuine evidence of what is possible. The person on the receiving end is not imagining that things got better. Things did get better for a period. The hope that motivates continued investment is not therefore irrational. It is grounded in actual experience. What the hope does not adequately account for is the pattern, which is that the change has never yet been sustained past the point where the relationship pressure that produced it has been relieved. The promise cycle is not primarily a failure of intention. It is a structural feature of a relationship in which the mechanism for change is the production of enough distress in the other person to trigger a corrective rather than genuine internal motivation for different behavior. Thought stopping, independent thinking is one of the most significant threats to any system that depends on the compliance and belief of its participants. Systems that need their members not to examine certain questions or reach certain conclusions, whether these are cults, authoritarian organizations, or controlling intimate relationships, develop mechanisms for preventing the sustained critical evaluation that might lead people away from compliance. Thought stopping is the installation of automatic interruption of critical thinking at the moment when that thinking begins to produce uncomfortable conclusions. In its most deliberate institutional form, it is often literal. A mantra, a prayer, a phrase, or an action is trained to be performed at the precise moment when doubt arises, interrupting the process of doubt before it can develop into independent conclusion. In intimate relationships, it operates through emotional interruption. When you begin to think critically about the relationship, anxiety, guilt, or manufactured crisis disrupts the thought process before it reaches completion. When you reach a conclusion that questions the other person's behavior or character, the emotional cost of that conclusion, the fear, the loyalty, the love you feel, interrupts the logical thread. Over time, the critical thinking process itself becomes associated with emotional discomfort, and you stop initiating it rather than experiencing the interruption each time. The thought stopping has become internal. You are now maintaining the censorship on your own thinking, which was the goal of the process all along. Overconfidence exploit. Overconfidence is one of the most consistent and most consequential cognitive biases documented in psychological research. People are, across the board and across cultures, systematically overconfident in the accuracy of their knowledge, the quality of their judgment, and the reliability of their predictions. They are not as good at knowing what they know as they believe they are. This overconfidence is exploited in two directions. A manipulator who wants to encourage risky or ill-considered behavior in their target can appeal to this confidence, flattering their judgment and expertise in ways that reduce appropriate caution and encourage decisions that serve the manipulator's interests. Simultaneously, a manipulator who wants to undermine the target's independent judgment can attack their confidence specifically to create the dependency described elsewhere, leaving the person without the self-trust they need to evaluate the manipulation they are experiencing. The exploitation of overconfidence is also visible at a social level in schemes and frauds that target the self-described savvy. The person who is confident that they are too intelligent to be fooled is, paradoxically, often more vulnerable to sophisticated manipulation than someone who approaches situations with more calibrated uncertainty about their own judgment. The belief that manipulation happens to other people, naive people, less intelligent people, is itself a form of overconfidence that leaves the believer without the appropriate vigilance that skepticism would provide. Discrediting preemptively. One of the most elegant moves in the manipulation playbook is to discredit a person before they have the opportunity to tell their story. If the person who might expose you can be made to seem unreliable, mentally unstable, vindictive, or otherwise an unreliable narrator of their own experience, then when they do speak, the audience is already primed to discount what they say. Preemptive discrediting is the establishment of a negative characterization of someone to a social or institutional audience in advance of anything that person says or reports. This is why, in many abusive or manipulative relationships, the person being harmed discovers that the people they try to turn to for support already have a version of them supplied by the person who caused the harm. They are crazy. They have a history of this. They tend to be very dramatic about things. They have been struggling for a while. None of these may be true, or they may be reframings of entirely legitimate responses to what has been done to them. But they arrive first, before the actual story, and the first version has an anchoring effect on how subsequent versions are received. Discrediting can also target the anticipated message rather than the specific messenger. If a person establishes that anyone who says certain kinds of things about them is obviously lying or is operating from a specific bias, they are building a logical structure that automatically dismisses the testimony before it is even heard. This is why information environments and systems that cannot tolerate scrutiny build elaborate frameworks for dismissing critical voices as automatically compromised. Jealousy engineering. Jealousy is an uncomfortable emotion that most people are motivated to resolve quickly, and the most natural resolution is an increase in effort, attention, and investment toward the relationship or position being threatened. This makes jealousy an extraordinarily useful tool for a manipulator who wants to produce increased engagement, effort, or compliance without having to ask for it directly. Engineering jealousy involves introducing information, real or constructed, about the interest of third parties, about the availability of alternatives, or about the possibility that your position or relationship is not as secure as you believe, with the specific goal of activating the anxiety and competitive motivation that jealousy produces. The most basic form is the reference to someone who is interested in them, delivered casually but timed precisely and with just enough information to activate concern without being explicit enough to be directly challenged. More sophisticated forms involve the deliberate cultivation of close relationships with third parties specifically to produce ongoing jealous uncertainty in the primary target. The engineering is plausibly deniable because jealousy can always be attributed to your own insecurity rather than to the conditions that were specifically created to produce it. And the motivation to resolve the jealousy keeps you in an active stance of effort and investment that serves the person who created the conditions, regardless of whether you are aware that those conditions were deliberate. Reality distortion. There are people who possess such extraordinary conviction, such unshakable certainty in their own vision, and such persistent communication of that vision, that the people around them begin to operate within a modified reality. They adapt their own perception of what is possible, what is true, and what is happening to the reality being projected by the person at the center of it. The term was famously used to describe the operational environment around certain charismatic technology figures, where the team surrounding them would come to believe that timelines, technical limitations, and ordinary constraints simply did not apply because the central figure was so certain that they did not. In manipulation, reality distortion functions as a sustained alternative framework for understanding events, relationships, and the self that the manipulator provides as a replacement for the target's own perception. Over time, with sufficient intensity and consistency, the target begins to inhabit this alternative reality rather than their own. What they directly experience is increasingly interpreted through the framework provided by the manipulator rather than evaluated against any external standard. The person in the center of a reality distortion field is very difficult to recognize from inside it because the distortion affects the very perceptual tools they would need to notice the distortion. Distance from the field, whether physical, social, or temporal, is often necessary before clarity returns. Echo chamber building. Genuine thinking is uncomfortable because it requires exposure to contradictory information and the cognitive work of integrating it. It is much more comfortable to live in an information environment where everything confirms what you already believe, where every input reinforces your existing framework and no input challenges it. This comfort makes echo chambers, environments in which information is curated to confirm rather than challenge, both popular and manipulable. A manipulator who controls the information environment of their target controls the conclusions the target reaches, not through any individual piece of false information, but through the systematic exclusion of any information that would complicate or contradict the preferred narrative. Echo chambers can be built by controlling the people someone talks to, the media they consume, the communities they participate in, and the alternative perspectives they are exposed to. Each individual act of curation may seem like the natural preference of a person for certain content or company. The cumulative effect is a person who has been steadily deprived of the information necessary to evaluate their own situation from outside the framework that has been constructed for them. Maintaining epistemic diversity, the deliberate and disciplined exposure to credible sources that challenge your existing frameworks, is one of the most important protections available against both echo chamber building by others and the natural human tendency towards self-reinforcing epistemic comfort. Threat calibration. Not all threats are delivered as explicit statements about consequences. In fact, the most effective threats are often communicated through implication, through history, through tone, through the careful deployment of reminders about what is possible without any explicit statement that what is possible will be realized. Threat calibration is the maintenance of a background atmosphere of potential consequence that shapes behavior without requiring the threat to be activated. The effectiveness of this technique relies on a history that provides the threat with credibility. If a person has demonstrated previously that certain consequences follow certain behaviors, the future implication of those consequences, however subtle, carries the weight of that demonstrated history. A look, a particular tone of voice, a reference to a past incident, a change in the atmosphere of the interaction. Any of these can communicate a threat to someone who has learned what follows from experience, without anything specific or confrontable being said. Threat calibration shapes behavior through the management of fear rather than through the fear itself. The target learns to monitor for the signals of impending consequence and to adjust their behavior to prevent those signals from escalating. This monitoring itself is a form of control because it keeps the target focused on managing the other person's emotional state rather than their own needs, decisions, or well-being. The most insidious aspect of this technique is that the threat never needs to be realized to remain effective, and in fact, a perpetually maintained but perpetually unrealized threat often exerts more sustained behavioral influence than a threat that is carried out and then over. Grooming progression. The word grooming is most commonly associated with the specific context of child exploitation, where it describes the process by which an abuser builds trust and access over time before initiating harm. But the structural description of grooming applies to many forms of manipulation in adult contexts as well, because it describes something that happens across all predatory relationships. The grooming progression is the systematic, patient, incremental process of desensitizing a target to increasingly abnormal conditions, building trust and dependency at each stage before advancing to the next, so that what would have been refused outright at the beginning is accepted without recognition of what has occurred by the end. The key characteristics of the grooming progression in any context are its patience and its incrementalism. It does not rush. It does not introduce what it ultimately wants until the foundation for acceptance of that thing has been thoroughly laid. Each stage feels natural and acceptable because it is only slightly beyond the previous stage, and the previous stage has already been normalized. The grooming progression also relies on investment. Each exchange, each confidence shared, each apparent vulnerability of the manipulators, each piece of special status granted to the target, is an investment that raises the psychological cost of the eventual withdrawal of cooperation. By the time the true nature of the situation becomes apparent, the target has so much invested in the relationship and the version of reality that has been constructed within it that recognition of the true nature of what occurred is itself profoundly disorienting. Identity foreclosure. A person with a strong, flexible, and internally derived sense of identity is substantially more resistant to manipulation than a person whose identity is externally dependent, still in formation, or held with significant uncertainty. This is why certain manipulators, particularly those who operate within cult-like systems or highly controlling intimate relationships, specifically target identity as both the entry point and the reconstruction project. Identity foreclosure as a manipulation technique involves replacing a person's existing sense of self with its complexity, its contradictions, and its independent sources of value, with a narrower and externally defined identity that is dependent on the manipulative system for its meaning and maintenance. The process typically begins with a destabilization of the existing identity. Who you were before is framed as incomplete, misguided, or the product of conditioning that the system will help you transcend. Then an alternative identity is offered, one that is clearer, more special, more meaningful, and available only through the framework being provided. This new identity comes with a community, a vocabulary, a set of explanations for the world, and a sense of purpose that can feel genuinely revelatory to someone who was experiencing identity uncertainty when the offer was made. The problem is that this new identity is owned by the system rather than by the person inhabiting it. It can be modified or revoked by the system at any time, and the threat of that revocation is sufficient to maintain compliance with whatever the system requires. Moral licensing. There is a psychological phenomenon in which doing something virtuous in one domain makes people more likely to behave badly in another. Having donated to charity, you feel more entitled to make a selfish choice. Having exercised, you feel more justified in an unhealthy indulgence. This is called moral licensing, and it operates as a form of internal permission granting, based on a perceived positive balance in your moral ledger. Manipulators exploit moral licensing in several ways. They may present themselves as exceptionally virtuous in visible domains specifically to justify or excuse behavior in less visible ones. The person who is publicly generous, publicly devoted to causes, publicly admirable in certain respects, is counting on the positive moral associations of those visible behaviors to provide cover for behaviors that would otherwise be unacceptable. The visible generosity becomes the license for private cruelty. They may also cultivate your sense of your own moral credit, encouraging you to see yourself as exceptionally good in certain respects, which you then use unconsciously to permit yourself to tolerate or excuse things in your relationship with them that you would find unacceptable in other contexts. Your own positive self-image becomes the mechanism through which compliance with unacceptable conditions is managed, because you do not see yourself as someone who would stay in a harmful situation, and that self-image creates pressure to rationalize the situation as not being harmful. Status currency. Human beings are status-seeking creatures across all cultures and all historical periods. This is not a shallow or trivial feature of human psychology. Status regulates access to resources, relationships, opportunities, and safety in deeply structural ways, and the drive to acquire and maintain it is correspondingly strong. This makes status one of the most powerful currencies in manipulation, both as a reward offered to produce compliance and as a threat of loss used to prevent independence. The promise of elevated status, the opportunity to become special, chosen, elevated, or distinguished through association with a certain person or membership in a certain group, is one of the most reliable motivators available. It can override rational evaluation of the costs being incurred in pursuit of the status. The threat of status loss, through public humiliation, social exclusion, or the withdrawal of the elevated identity that the manipulative system had provided, is equally powerful. A person who has built their social identity around a particular affiliation or relationship has a great deal to lose if that affiliation or relationship is withdrawn, and the anticipation of that loss can maintain compliance with requirements that would otherwise be refused. Recognizing status manipulation requires asking whose interests are served by your desire for the status being offered or your fear of the status loss being threatened, and whether those interests are aligned with your own. Reputational threat. In a highly connected social world, reputation is both enormously valuable and extraordinarily fragile. It has taken years to build and can be fundamentally damaged in ways that are very difficult to repair by a single determined person with access to social networks, public platforms, or community relationships. This fragility makes reputation a powerful lever, and the threat to it, whether explicit or implicit, is used to maintain compliance, silence, and continued cooperation with conditions that would otherwise be refused. The reputational threat does not always need to be direct. Sometimes it operates through the visible demonstration of what has happened to others who failed to cooperate. Sometimes it operates through the indirect communication that the information exists that could be damaging if it were to reach certain audiences without any specific statement that it will be shared. Sometimes it operates through the cultivation of a narrative about you in your social environment that is false or distorted, but that you know would be difficult to effectively challenge, leaving you in the position of cooperating to avoid the escalation of a narrative you cannot fully control. The reputational threat is particularly effective in closed communities, professional environments where credibility is the primary currency, and personal relationships where the social network is shared. In each of these contexts, the cost of the threat being realized is so high that the threat itself, maintained at the level of implication, is sufficient to produce the compliance it is designed to secure. Contrarianism strategic. There is a form of intellectual positioning that presents itself as independent thinking, but functions primarily as a tool of influence and group management. Strategic contrarianism involves consistently taking positions opposed to whatever the prevailing consensus is, not because independent evaluation has produced different conclusions, but because the performance of opposition creates a specific kind of social and intellectual status. The strategic contrarian positions themselves as a critical thinker who is not subject to the conformity pressures that shape other people's views. This positioning carries real social value because genuine independent thought and the willingness to question consensus is indeed valuable. But genuine independent thought sometimes agrees with consensus and sometimes does not, depending on what the evidence and reasoning support. Strategic contrarianism, by contrast, is predictably oppositional, which is itself a form of dependence on the consensus, just an inverted one. In manipulation, strategic contrarianism is used to destabilize anyone seeking support or consensus for a position, to maintain an air of superiority over conventional thinkers, and to create the impression of depth and insight that comes from disagreement without the substance of genuine alternative analysis. In groups, the reliable contrarian serves the additional function of consuming the group's energy in responding to opposition rather than moving forward, which benefits whoever does not want the group to move forward. Radical transparency trap. Honesty and transparency are genuine values that serve healthy relationships in communities. But like most genuine values, they can be weaponized by being applied selectively, strategically, or with a precision that serves the agenda of the person performing them rather than the mutual interests they nominally represent. Radical transparency as a manipulation tool involves the deliberate oversharing of certain truths as a mechanism of control, obligation creation, or destabilization. Consider the partner who shares, with apparently guileless honesty, every thought they have about their own attraction to others, framed as a commitment to radical transparency and the rejection of dishonest social performance. The stated value of honesty is real, but the specific truths being shared, the timing of their sharing, and the emotional effect they produce in the listener suggest that the transparency is serving a purpose other than connection or honesty. The truths are calibrated to destabilize, to create insecurity, or to establish a dynamic of one-sided emotional exposure where you know things about the other person's inner life that they have not reciprocally sought to understand about yours. Radical transparency is also used to front-load legitimacy for behavior that will later be criticized. By announcing something clearly before doing it, the person can claim that they were always open about it, and that your objection therefore reflects your failure to listen rather than their failure to consider your well-being. Dehumanizing language. The way we talk about people shapes how we think about them and how we treat them. This has been documented across centuries of political violence and abuse, in which the initial step of sanctioning harm to a group of people always involves the prior step of linguistic and conceptual dehumanization. By attaching labels, categories, or characterizations to people that remove or reduce their full humanity, the psychological barriers to treating them badly are progressively lowered. In interpersonal manipulation, dehumanizing language operates at a smaller scale, but through the same mechanism. Consistent characterizations of another person as crazy, irrational, childish, stupid, or fundamentally different from normal people serve to lower the moral standing of that person in the mind of the speaker and in the minds of any audience who accepts the characterization. Once a person has been successfully categorized in this way, their experiences, perceptions, and reports carry less weight. Their suffering is easier to dismiss. Their complaints are more readily attributed to their defective character rather than to the actual events producing them. Dehumanizing language in intimate relationships is a particularly reliable marker of abuse because it signals that the fundamental respect and recognition of the other person's full humanity that is a prerequisite of genuinely caring relationship has been withdrawn or was never present. Surrogate punishment. One of the most confusing experiences in a controlling relationship is the experience of being punished for something you did not do, or of a specific incident triggering a response that is wildly disproportionate to the incident itself. When this happens, you are likely experiencing surrogate punishment, the displacement of anger, resentment, or distress accumulated from other sources onto you, the available and safe target. The dynamics that produce surrogate punishment are understandable in their origins. A person who has accumulated significant frustration, humiliation, or anger in a context where it cannot be expressed safely, whether a workplace, a hierarchical relationship, or an internal emotional state they do not have the skills to process, needs somewhere for that pressure to go. If you are positioned as less powerful and less likely to effectively retaliate in the relationship, you become the surrogate target for pressure that originated elsewhere. What makes this particularly difficult to navigate is that the response you receive is so disconnected from the trigger event that rational navigation of the specific situation is impossible. The problem is not the thing you did or said. The problem is the accumulated load being discharged through the encounter with you. No amount of addressing the surface event will resolve the displacement because the surface event was never actually the issue. Understanding this does not make surrogate punishment acceptable, but it does explain why some confrontations feel impossible to resolve through any normal means. Feigned incompetence. There is a specific and counterintuitive form of manipulation in which incompetence is performed deliberately and strategically to avoid the responsibilities, obligations, and effort that would otherwise be required. Feigned incompetence in domestic and professional contexts is the behavior of someone who has discovered that doing things badly enough, consistently enough, produces the result that others eventually stop asking them to do those things and take over the responsibility themselves. The person who consistently burns dinner, who does laundry in ways that damage clothes, who files reports in ways that require extensive correction, who participates in care tasks in ways that generate more work than they save, has discovered something important. Their apparent incompetence is removing them from an obligation by transferring that obligation to someone more competent. The other person, who cannot tolerate the consequences of the bad performance, takes over, and the feigned incompetent gets exactly what they wanted, which is freedom from the obligation. Recognizing feigned incompetence requires noticing whether the incompetence is consistent or selective. People who are genuinely limited in certain domains usually demonstrate comparable capability across comparable types of task. Selective incompetence, which is specifically concentrated in the domains from which the person would most benefit from being excluded, while full competence is demonstrated in domains they prefer to engage with, suggests strategy rather than limitation. Reward randomization, the variable ratio reinforcement schedule, in which reward is delivered after an unpredictable number of responses rather than at regular intervals, produces the most persistent and most extinction-resistant behavior of any reinforcement schedule known. The slot machine operates on this principle. You do not know which pull will pay out, so you keep pulling. The uncertainty itself drives the behavior far more persistently than predictable reward would. In human relationships, reward randomization works through the unpredictable delivery of positive experiences, warm interactions, genuine connection, affirmation, and the things that feel good in the relationship in a pattern that does not correlate clearly with your own behavior. The positive experience is not absent. If it were absent, the relationship would have nothing to sustain it. but it is also not reliably present. You cannot identify what you need to do or be to produce it consistently. You cannot plan for it or depend on it. You only know that it has appeared before and therefore might appear again. This unpredictability drives the same pulling behavior that the slot machine produces. You keep trying, keep investing, keep returning, driven by the variable reward history that has established both the hope of the payout and the impossibility of predicting it. Recognizing reward randomization in a relationship requires a kind of meta-observation where you step back from the experience of individual good moments and ask whether the good moments have any relationship to your own behavior or the relationship's stated structure, or whether they appear and disappear according to no pattern you can reliably identify. Group identity weaponizing. One of the most powerful sources of human motivation is the desire to belong to and be accepted by the groups that form our social identity. Religious communities, ethnic groups, families, political movements, professional communities, and intimate friend networks all provide the fundamental human needs of belonging, meaning, and shared identity. This need is so strong that the threat of exclusion from a valued group is among the most effective behavioral controls available, often more effective than fear of physical harm. Group identity weaponizing is the exploitation of this need by someone with the power to control group membership or group status, using the threat of exclusion or the promise of belonging to produce compliance with requirements that would otherwise be refused. The most explicit version of this is the formal shunning practiced by some religious communities, where members who fail to comply with doctrinal requirements are formally excluded from community life in ways that sever every existing social relationship the person had. But the same mechanism operates at much smaller scales. In families where belonging is contingent on compliance, in friend groups where acceptance is managed by a central figure, and in romantic relationships where the partner controls access to mutual social life. The power of this tool comes from the genuine and legitimate importance of the belonging it threatens. The need being exploited is real. The manipulation lies in the use of that need as leverage rather than in its fulfillment. The reset button. There is a move that certain people make at the end of a cycle of harmful behavior that is so powerful in its effect that it can undo the clarity of even the most carefully arrived at understanding. The reset is the production of a moment, an experience, a gesture, or a state so positive, so reminiscent of the best version of the relationship, and so precisely timed to arrive when the other person is closest to a final decision that it effectively returns the emotional state to an earlier point in the cycle. The reset is not the same as genuine change. It is a recalibration to the starting position so that the cycle can begin again. The reset can be romantic, a grand gesture, a perfect evening, a reproduction of a formative early memory from the relationship that reactivates all the original feeling and all the original hope. It can be performatively vulnerable. The disclosure of something deeply personal that restores intimacy and the sense of being specially trusted. It can be unexpectedly ordinary and good, a stretch of days in which everything is fine, easy, warm, and normal in ways that make the recent harmful period feel like an anomaly rather than a pattern. The reset is effective because it is real in its content even when it is strategic in its timing. The good evening genuinely happened. The connection felt during it was genuinely experienced. The problem is not that the good is fake, but that the good is not stable, not reflective of an actual change in the underlying dynamic, and not predictive of a different future. It is a point in a cycle, not a new beginning. Recognizing the reset requires the discipline of holding the pattern in view at the exact moment when the pattern is producing its most compelling counter-evidence. That is the hardest moment to maintain clarity. It is also the most important one.